Chapter 421. A Narrow Escape 3. He could not help but suspect that this amethyst fish palace was fucking opened by this loathsome girl's family. It seemed to have been simply customized and made to order just for her. Everyone else was just cannon fodder, only she was given great treatment and a journey that was favorable for her till the end. The Crown Prince's pair of malicious eyes glared at her unwaveringly. Two raging blazes jumped about in his eyes. That intense fire was itching to fly over and burn Su Luo until nothing was left. Su Luo didn't even bother to pay him any attention, directly ignoring him. She turned around and said something to Nangong Luyun in a low voice. That manner, which was as though nobody else was present, made the fire in the Crown Prince's eyes even more vigorous. He was so infuriated that he reached out with one hand to grab at Su Luo. However, without waiting for his hands to stretch out, one could only see a brilliant ray flash by them, and suddenly, the Crown Prince gave a tragic scream. Looking over again, his already injured right hand now was drenched in even more blood. As it turned out, that halo of cold light was produced by Nangong Luyun. Nangong Luyun, you dare to attack me? The Crown Prince aggressively pointed towards Nangong Luyun. He was like a dense power ready to explode at any time, from head to toe. Don't forget what you vowed with heaven as witness. This lifetime, you cannot kill me. Su Luo's curious gaze looked towards Nangong Luyun. If what the Crown Prince said was real, then under what kind of circumstances was Nangong Luyun forced to make this kind of oath? Back then, in the end, what really happened? That Nangong Luyun would make a promise not to kill the Crown Prince, and also to still have affection for the Jade Lake Palace. Su Luo was somewhat curious, somewhat perplexed, and also felt sorry for Nangong Luyun, having such a bitter experience. Nangong Luyun hugged Su Luo, indifferently cast him a glance and nodded, making a show of taking it seriously. This king has remembered it all along. Good that you remember it. Hope you won't forget it for a lifetime. The Crown Prince arrogantly and coldly sneered with his chin out in an arrogant and ice-cold manner. Nangong Luyun smiled faintly, carelessly considering while holding his chin with an alluring smile that was demonically charming. To kill someone while not letting them die, yes, doesn't seem that difficult. The Crown Prince's body suddenly stiffened like a corpse. His pair of eyes was firmly fixed upon Nangong Luyun, wishing he could glare a few bloody holes into his body. The most important reason why he would stand in front of Nangong Luyun for so many years, secured in his safety, was not because of his identity as the Crown Prince / rather it was because in the past, Nangong Luyun, in front of everyone and facing him, had made an oath. In the future, no matter what he did, Nangong Luyun would not kill him. Mainly because of this, these many years, his conduct was unruly and without the slightest scruple. Nangong Luyun had all along tolerated it with the gaze of a spectator. However now, Nangong Luyun had directly opened his mouth to threaten him. The Crown Prince's body started to tremble in a split second. His gaze moved from Nangong Luyun's body to Su Luo's body. Just because of this loathsome girl, Nangong Luyun would rebel. What Li Yaoyao said was correct. This woman could not be allowed to remain alive. The people with a murderous desire towards Su Luo in their heart was absolutely not merely the Crown Prince. All of a sudden, the surrounding earth quaked like mountains shaking for a period of time. Not good. The time has almost reached the limit. Bei Qining cried out in alarm to Nangong Luyun. Nangong Luyun frowned slightly and pulled Su Luo to walk towards the exit. His Luo girl's speed was too slow. He could only carry her so they would get out in the shortest amount of time. Just at this time, suddenly, all around was filled with white-colored smog. Very quickly, everyone's line of sight became somewhat fuzzy. Su Luo's good luck seemed to have already been consumed till nothing was left at this moment. Now, a huge piece of black-colored rock dropped out of the sky and smashed directly towards Su Luo's head. Careful! An anxious expression crossed Nangong Luyun's eyes. He directly launched himself towards her and pushed Su Luo far away. He used his body to directly cover hers and safely protected her under his wing. Chapter 422. A Narrow Escape 4. The huge, black-colored boulder smashed down, paused just a little, and then directly rolled towards the position where those two were. This huge boulder ignored everyone else, as if only possessing endless hatred for Su Luo, clinging to her and not letting her go. The huge boulder carried sufficient spirit force to engulf everything as it rolled over to crush them, whereas there was only a smooth wall behind her and Nangong Luyun. There was no way to avoid it. Nangong Luyun, with his back pressed up against the wall, concentrated all the spirit force he had into both his hands to hold off the rolling and crushing force of that huge boulder. The huge, black-colored boulder was stopped momentarily, but it seemed to be getting angry and roared. It constantly raised its power where it was stopped, the ground echoing with sounds of friction, its strength abruptly increasing dramatically. Now, the huge boulder was like a crazy magical beast, unreasonably and wholeheartedly moving forward with vigor. Whoever tried to obstruct it would be killed by it. Even though Nangong Liuyun's expression was unperturbed without a single ripple, but Su Luo saw that his forehead was coated with a thin layer of perspiration that condensed into beads that tumbled down. It could clearly be seen that the pressure on Nangong Luyun was surely very great. "Go quickly!" Nangong Luyun burst out and shouted towards Su Luo. Now, Su Luo's heart was somewhat anxious. However, she didn't listen to his words to leave immediately. If she was to leave, then what would happen to Nangong Luyun? His hands only had to loosen a little before he would be crushed by that furious, really huge boulder. At that time, his chances of survival would be bleak. Go quickly." The sweat on Nangong Liuyun's face rolled down continuously. Those eyes that were eternally glittering with being in control of everything now were matchlessly imposing. Bei Qining and them too saw him like this, also anxiously ran over to help, but their strength compared to that of the huge boulder differed too greatly. Just when Su Luo was at her wit's end, the ground produced a burst of creaking noises. Suddenly that wall behind Nangong Luyun unexpectedly, and without any reason, disappeared. The strength that was supporting his back was immediately gone. Nangong! Su Luo urgently charged towards Nangong Liuyun's back. She planned to use her own strength to support his back. However, Su Luo had only taken the first step before the Jade Lake's fairy pushed her aside, and only the Jade Lake's fairy herself. "Third senior brother, be careful." Li Yaoyao quickly threw herself towards Nangong Luyun. It was as if her entire person was clinging onto his body, firmly holding him. Su Luo was ruthlessly knocked into the wall. Her head became somewhat dizzy. Just at this moment, suddenly, the huge black-colored boulder gave a world-shaking bellow and sent out all its strength in a split second, knocking Nangong Luyun back in that moment. Su Luo didn't have enough time to react. One could only hear the sound of crashing. A smooth wall dropped from the sky and once again filled in the gap where it had become empty. But Nangong Luyun, the Jade Lake's fairy, and also that black-colored, really huge boulder, unexpectedly disappeared without a reason. That wall fitted in seamlessly, just as if it had never disappeared before. However, Nangong Luyun really did vanish. Su Luo stared blankly at the scene in front of her eyes, and for a split second, couldn't react. "Oh heavens, this is..." Seeing the words that suddenly appeared on the wall, Bei Qining was simply stupefied. He turned his head to look at Su Luo with an unimaginably shocked expression. Su Luo was attracted by his attention, raised her eyes and looked over at him. However, Bei Qining jumped up as if his butt was set on fire and rushed past, leaning his body against the wall, as if he could obstruct the writing on top of the wall this way. However, how could the movements of the body be faster compared to her gaze? When Su Luo's gaze focused on the words on the wall, her entire body became motionless with a shocked expression in her eyes. "This is impossible." Su Luo shook her head, little by little. Her voice was soft and weak, as if she was mumbling to herself. Lan Xian and Anya Ming also saw the words on that wall. Both of the expressions on their faces were also very complicated. Momentarily, they didn't know what was the best way for them to go and comfort Su Luo. Chapter 423. A Narrow Escape. 5. Lan Xian opened his mouth, Only after a long time was he able to choke out a sentence. Sister-in-law, you must believe in second older brother. On Yeming's expression was also heavy at this time. He solemnly nodded his head towards Su Luo. You should feel reassured. Second oldest definitely won't betray you. You must have faith in yourself, and also, you must have faith in second oldest. Now, even if Su Luo was to emphasize that her and Nangong Liuyun's relationship was innocent, but her heart faintly understood. It was not as if she did not have feelings for Nangong Liuyun. Su Luo foolishly stared at the wall that was as smooth as a leveled mirror, with her mind completely blank. A trace of pain clutched at the place closest to her heart. Just a moment ago, she did not misread. On that wall was clearly written 3 words. Ha 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 ha. Seeing Su Luo's dazed appearance, the crown prince suddenly erupted into wild laughter just now. He was convulsing with laughter, with a kind of expression as if having avenged a great hatred. One could only see him pointing at Su Luo, laughing until he nearly couldn't breathe. Ha ha ha, loathsome girl. You can also have today, ha ha ha. The crown prince laughed until he was free from worry and was cocksure. His pair of eyes were without the slightest scruple, tauntingly fixed on Su Luo, full of a mocking overtone. Su Luo's complexion was as calm as water. Nobody could make out that underneath that serene surface appearance was a roaring sea. The crown prince once again laughed heartily with hands at his waist. Wahaha! Ow! The 2 of them had entered the joyous conjugal room. Oh, loathsome girl, you tell me, what's to be done? The 2 of them now are right in the middle of completing the ritual of a wedding night. Su Luo's complexion was gloomy, but she ignored his provocation. What the crown prince said was not wrong. Just now, the 3 words written on the wall that appeared was precisely joyous conjugal room. Joyous conjugal room. Who doesn't know the meaning of being inside this room? The crown prince still felt that it wasn't enough, so he continued to jeer at Su Luo. Second oldest really does have good fortune. That is the beautiful Jade Lake's fairy O. A fairy that a countless number of men yearn for even in their dreams. Just like this, she was conveniently given to second oldest, however. Looks like after they get out, I will drink their wedding toast. The crown prince was too occupied with striking a blow at Su Luo that he nearly forgot the position he was in. Su Luo's expression was unperturbed and without a ripple. Her pair of tranquil eyes cast him a glance with a smile that was not quite a smile. Could it be the crown prince forgot? If Nangong and the Jade Lake's fairy really become an item, under their united strength, the one that will suffer the most loss and benefits will be you, the crown prince. Oh. Having been sobered up by Su Luo's words, the crown prince's complexion immediately stiffened. He couldn't help but to be somewhat upset. He had really become muddle-headed by his own hatred. The first thing he thought of was to retaliate against this loathsome girl. What she said was absolutely right. If those 2 indeed became an item, the one that would suffer the most damage would more accurately be him. The crown prince took a furtive glance at Li Outyin, but now, it seemed that Li Outyin was unexpectedly missing. How could he be missing? Where was Li Outyin hiding? Could it be that he had already abandoned him, the crown prince? A panicked feeling flashed through the crown prince's heart, but his face was still as tough as before, staring at Su Luo with a mocking and making fun of her expression. This prince had thought to gift you with a side concubine position, but you actually refused. Haha, now, how about this? You think that Nangong Liuyun will still marry you? Simply too ridiculous. Su Luo's hands at her side was tightly clenched into fists, but her complexion was indifferent. The corner of her mouth had a slightly cold, smiling expression. Bei Qining saw that Su Luo was displeased. Immediately, his expression became overcast. He stood in front of Su Luo and with a frown, cast a glance at the crown prince. You want to court death? The crown prince brassily glared at Bei Qining. You have the guts to kill me? Don't forget, I am the crown prince of an empire. Bei Qining had both hands crossed in front of his chest. With a ghost of a smile, he said, What do you think? Just based on a few of you, and think you can get past us in a fight? Do you believe, or not, that we can immediately kill you and afterwards destroy your corpse to wipe out any trace of evidence? Chapter 424, Narrow Escape. 6. Beichening, you dare. The Crown Prince's eyes were malicious. He shouted loudly with violent fury. As long as we wipe out all of you, who will know it was us who killed all of you? Beichening seemed to really have this intent, and shot a meaningful glance towards Lan Xian. Them too. The three of them formed a circle and simultaneously approached the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince's mind became somewhat frantic, pointing at him while cursing in rage. Beichening. Nangong Luyun, however, has already made an oath. You guys, don't come over. You guys stand still by this prince's orders. It was really like what Beichening said, to kill someone here, in order to silence them. This place was simply too suitable. Second oldest is second oldest. We are us. We never swore not to kill you, oh, stupid Crown Prince. Beichening smiled happily as he got nearer to the Crown Prince. The other two were also getting closer. A fearful expression came across the Crown Prince's eyes. Nangong Luyun indeed did swear an oath, however. He didn't swear it on behalf of these few childhood friends of his. He knew that these few individuals extremely loathed him. Maybe they really would. The three of them, with Beichening, formed a triangle and surrounded the Crown Prince who was in the middle. Now, the Crown Prince looked like a trapped, condemned beast. Just at this most critical juncture, suddenly, from the ground came a slight noise. Not good. Beichening surreptitiously had a bad premonition all of a sudden. He hastily retreated backwards. Suddenly, this stone room seemed too strange. Why was it that there were traps and snares everywhere? Now, a hole appeared out of the ground from nowhere. It directly swallowed up the three in Beichening's group, along with the Crown Prince. The four people simultaneously dropped into the black hole. In a split second, the four people's figures vanished without a trace. In a blink of an eye, the ground once again was restored to its original state. It was as though a black hole had never appeared previously. Su Luo bit her lower lip and pressed up tightly to the wall. Deep, worry lines flashed across her eyebrows. In the end, what was going on? Why was it that people would vanish in an unbroken succession? It seemed as if imperceptibly, there was a hand manipulating everything, and they were like the chess pieces in the opponent's palm, being toyed with by him. Now, there was not much time, and she didn't know if Beichening and them would meet with a mishap. Also, there was Nangong Luyun. A worried expression flashed through Su Luo's eyes. Suddenly, Su Luo felt that in front of her eyes, it had gone black. A man's image that stood straight appeared in front of her. She lifted her eyes and encountered a pair of eyes that was full of maliciousness and rancor. Liao Yin. Su Luo clenched her teeth and exhaled out in a low voice. Now, the corner of Liao Yin's mouth burst open in a coldly detached and sneering smile. His sinister gaze stared fixedly at Su Luo, unblinkingly staring at her, and giving a person an eerily strange kind of feeling. Su felt her back become a little chilled. Liao Yin finally opened his mouth. His tone was as tender as if speaking to a sweetheart. What, afraid? This kind of Liao Yin was 10 times scarier than when he was being coldly detached. He closed in step by step. Su Luo could only continuously retreat. What to do? The killing intent in Liao Yin's eyes were just that obvious. Su Luo could see it with one glance. He wanted to kill her. Furthermore, it was not the kind that would be settled with one cut. Rather, it was the kind where she would constantly be tormented until she died. Su Luo had never once wished she had peerless formidable strength as she did now. Now, she was only a 3rd rank whereas Liao Yin was a 6th rank. In his eyes, she was a piece of fish meat on top of a chopping block. No matter how he slaughtered, she lacked the strength to resist. In his pair of eyes, clearly, he had considered her to be a dead person. A dead person? Su Luo sucked in a deep breath. Her complexion was calm and easygoing. With an indifferent smile, she said, Liao Yin, why is it that only you are fine? Aren't you also fine? Liao Yin forcefully got closer step by step, with a smile that was not a smile, as he approached Su Luo. Chapter 425. A Narrow Escape. 7. The disappearance of Beichening and them was part of a sinister plot you set up? Su Luo tried to divert his attention. Liao Yin, having heard what was said, immediately started to laugh wildly. Ha ha ha. Since you are about to die, then I'll let you become a lucid ghost. Yes, Bei Qining and them disappeared because of my trick. In fact, it was not limited to this. Ha ha ha. Nangong Luyun was also put in there by me. You, that is your younger sister. Su Luo clenched her teeth. Her expression condensed into frost. That was Yao Yao's idea. Li Outyin smiled very arrogantly. You thought that good luck would only be yours alone? Let me tell you. Before Yao Yao was hung in midair, she already got hold of map with all the traps and snares in this stone room. Humph. Only now had Su Luo realized why she had a kind of feeling of being made a fool in someone's palm. As it turned out, when Li Yaoyao first entered, she had already gotten a map of all the traps and snares in this stone room. Then, she deliberately locked herself and Nangong within the joyous conjugal room. This woman was truly extremely shameless to actually use this method to force Nangong. Still considered herself the exceedingly refined Jade Lake's fairy that was above the common people. A burst of nausea surfaced in Su Luo's thoughts. Su Luo smiled sarcastically while looking at Liao Yin. Among the common people, it is circulated that the Jade Lake Palace is noble, virtuous, and icily arrogant. Supposed to be secular and detached, but who would have thought that in order to obtain a man, the majestic Jade Lake's fairy would actually use such a despicable method? Is she really unable to be married off? To have to coerce and stick to one man like this? You will shut up now. Liao Yin furiously pinched Su Luo's chin to a stop and hatefully glared at her. You dare to say such things about Yao Yao? Do you believe I will directly strangle you to death? Don't tell me it isn't so? A bright light flashed through Su Luo's eyes as she continued to stir up Liao Yin. Ha ha ha, are you killing me to silence me? As long as you did something despicable, you would kill them to silence them. Oh, so is this how the reputation of Jade Lake Palace was established? Looks like you guys are also only so. Li Aotain was extremely enraged by Su Luo, so his hands exerted even more force. Su Luo was pinched until she nearly couldn't breathe. However, there was not a single thread of fear in her eyes. Instead, there was a sneering smile in them. Just when Liao Yin was in the midst of getting more furious, one could see Su Luo lift up her leg and ruthlessly kick towards Liao Yin's family jewels. No matter what you said, Su Luo was still at the peak of third rank. A kick with all of her strength, that force was not going to be weak, let alone the fact that Liao Yin was basically unguarded. Even more, to say nothing of the higher the level of a person's martial arts cultivation, their entire body would be defended, but that region would always be the weakest existence. One could only hear the start of a bitterly tragic shout, and Liao Yin immediately released Su Luo. Both of his hands covered that region. He was in so much pain that he nearly fell to the ground and rolled about. Su Luo's kick succeeded. Why would she still dare to stay still? She let her foot go and started to run. Run. Now, Nangong Luyun was not by her side. The only thing she could do was to save herself. The main culprit of everything was the Jade Lake's fairy. Just recalling this woman, a touch of furious intent exploded from Su Luo's eyes. Last time in Sunset Mountain Range, it was also because of this woman that she was chased all over the mountains and plains to be killed, practically another narrow escape. However, back then, it was merely third ranks chasing to kill her, so she could still somewhat cope with them. Yet now, the person chasing to kill her was Liao Yin, a sixth-rank existence. Only heavens knows if she could escape from his pursuit. If she was captured by him, then it would just be tragically miserable. Su Luo's figure was like lightning, shooting out like an explosion. Liao Yin has set up an inescapable trap, deliberately separating her from Bei Qinying's group. The only reason was just to kill her. How could he let her so easily escape? Chapter 426, A Narrow Escape, 8. Now, he was kicked again, this time in his family jewels. At that moment, a new animosity was added to the old hatred. A raging inferno and deep murderous intent flashed through Liao Yin's eyes. If he didn't kill this loathsome girl today, he, Liao Yin, Swore he was not human? Li Outyin endured the sharp pain from the lower part of his body and started to take some strides. With lightning speed, he chased after Su Luo's back. Li Outyin's 6th rank strength, compared to Su Luo's, was simply as different as night and day. Even though that special place had been injured, his speed was still very astonishing. Su Luo ran without stopping. When she was choosing which path to run on as a way to survive, Su Luo hesitated for a split second and just picked the 5th passageway. This was because the other passageways would have magical beast running amok, and although perhaps they could withstand Li Outyin's attack, she was basically unfamiliar with them. However, the 5th passageway was different. The reason being was that she knew. This one had a huge, foolish tiger. The huge, foolish tiger was an 8th rank in strength. As long as she could run to its side, she would absolutely be safe. Precisely because she had this kind of faith, therefore Su Luo's use of the spirit dance steps was simply like a hurricane in speed. Li Outyin chased at her back, so angry that he was about to curse her mother. This loathsome girl must have eaten some special medicinal pills. How could her speed be so fast? Totally unable to tell, she had the speed of a 3rd rank. The her right now was nearly at the speed of a 5th rank. However, it didn't matter. This passageway was very long. He had plenty of time to catch her. Owing to the disparity in their strength, the distance between Li Outyin and Su Luo continuously drew closer. More and more, the gap became smaller, as if nearly in the time it took to reach out a hand, he would close the distance. Su Luo saw the corner in front of her eyes, and immediately, her heart became joyful. If she didn't remember it wrongly, that place was where the huge, foolish tiger rested. Before, the huge, foolish tiger was located right there. She was saved. Su Luo speedily turned that corner and entered. However, what made her despair was just a moment ago. Her persistent motivation since the beginning, that huge, foolish tiger she had placed all her hopes on, was unexpectedly missing. My Su Luo secretly cursed in her heart, simply anxious to the extreme. She had already been prepared to bribe the huge, foolish tiger with a huge amount of celestial spirit water. Who would have imagined that it unfortunately was not around to enjoy it? In the second that Su Luo was distracted, Li Outyin had caught up to her for the kill. This time, Li Aotain simply did not bother to waste words with Su Luo. His expression was solemn as he formed multiple patterns with both hands. All of a sudden, a vast field of white snow appeared behind his back. Endless amounts of ice and snow were floating all around. The temperature in the surrounding atmosphere, in a flash, dropped to the freezing point. The ice-cold, bone-chilling air were like knives, saturating the air. Very quickly, Su Luo discovered that the top of her hair and her clothing all had white frost forming. As expected, quite formidable. Su Luo was secretly startled. She never expected that Li Outyin's attribute was that of a formidable, powerful, murderous ice system mage. Now, with the pure white snow and bone-chilling wind, Li Outyin was like a god standing in a field of snowfall. His expression was apathetic, his murderous aura undiminished. Heavenly dance of snowfall, Li Outyin shouted in a loud voice. Immediately, the endless snow and wind from all around frantically rushed towards Su Luo. The snowflakes he condensed, every single one of them was the size of a bowl, with sparkling and translucent 6 sides. Every side of the snowflakes, flashing with cold light, was as sharp as a dagger. A countless number of dagger-like snow simultaneously pressed towards Su Luo, almost entirely covering her within it. An astonished expression flashed through Su Luo's eyes. As it turned out, a 6th rank expert had this kind of strength. Compared to her strength, she simply could not withstand a single blow. Regardless, things had already reached this point. She had no choice but to go all out. Su Luo was definitely not someone who would give up easily. One could see that her expression was coldly focused. A streak of black-colored handprint floated above her head and was rapidly enlarging, warding off things for her who were underneath it. Chapter 427, A Narrow Escape, 9. Humph. A small 3rd rank dares to resist my heavenly dance of snowfall? Keep dreaming. Li Outyin stood with his hands behind his back, with an expression of cold indifference and arrogance. Su Luo only heard a rumbling noise, an endless wind and snow swept towards her, wrapping around her. So much so, that even her great dimensional imprint was also wrapped up in it. The ground was shaking. Nearly all the walls were already covered by white frost. It was an extremely frightening cold stream with strength sufficient to destroy everything. It nearly couldn't be resisted. Almost in the blink of an eye, her great handprint was immediately transformed into dust, vanishing in the air. Moreover, Su Luo's entire person then became frozen inside the ice. Afterwards, what emerged before Li Outyin's eyes was an ice-cold, human-shaped sculpture. The sculpture shone with white light and flickered in the cold air. You could clearly see Su Luo within the ice sculpture. The Su Luo right now had one leg lifted. Like the one-legged golden rooster stance in Tai Chi, both of her hands were arranged in a proper fighting stance, and she was frozen in this stance, motionlessly fixed in place. She seemed really miserable, but also very amusing. At this moment, Li Outyin's expression was haughty, arrogant, and ice-cold. He walked forward a few steps and with a ghost of a smile, he looked at Su Luo, who was frozen inside, the corners of his mouth producing a taunting sneer. "Loathsome girl. You also have a day like today." Li Outyin pondered, holding his chin, going around Su Luo, this ice sculpture, in circles. He walked while simultaneously clicking his tongue. This pose is still very interesting. If this was placed outside for everyone to enjoy, it should also be pretty good. Although Su Luo was sealed inside, her ears, however, were not deaf. She could see her current distressful appearance in Li Outyin's meaningful glance. Li Outyin stood in front of Su Luo, and suddenly, a light flashed across his eyes. He thought up an extremely delightful idea. "Consider you, loathsome girl, as having good luck. This time, I really can't kill you. That will be a loss for your excellent body." Li Outyin coldly laughed. "If Nangong Luyun saw you with a stitch of clothing in a frozen sculpture, that was then placed in the street for people to look, surely, no matter how much he likes you, he also would not want you, such a loathsome girl again." A touch of rage flashed through Su Luo's heart. In the beginning, she merely thought that Li Outyin was only icily arrogant. She didn't expect he would be so perverted. This kind of perverted plan. Only he would think of it. However, no fury could be seen in Su Luo's eyes. As far as this plan was concerned, to her, it was not bad. At least, it would give her a final period of time to strive for freedom. Li Outyin thought a bit more. Ultimately, he still decided to temporarily leave Su Luo alive. This was due to the fact that, if he was to directly kill her, it would not be as pleasurable as completely mistreating her. Li Outyin also didn't free Su Luo from the ice prison. He merely extended his long arm and easily carried Su Luo, who was shaped like a statue, on his shoulder. Afterwards, he traveled in the direction towards the outside of the palace. In fact, Su Luo really wanted to ask him out loud. Wasn't he worried about his younger sister? Could he really allow the Jade Lake's fairy to stupidly stay in that joyous conjugal room? After all, the time limit in this amethyst fish palace was almost at the end. However, seeing Li Outyin's completely unconcerned expression, Su Luo just knew that Nangong Luyun ought to be all right. Only, she don't know if he would be able to keep holding on. With the Jade Lake's fairies, that kind of looks, it would not be easy to continue holding on, resisting. A complicated light flashed through Su Luo's eyes. Nonetheless, now, the most important thing was her own safety. Li Outyin's notion was so perverted. If her movements were stopped by him, then she might as well smash her head into something to die. As long as she thought of herself without a stitch of clothing being placed on the street for people to look, Su Luo would feel her scalp go numb. All of a sudden, Su Luo recalled the last time she was chased to be killed, and what the servant of the Jade Lake's fairy had said. Chapter 428, A Narrow Escape. 10. The Jade Lake Palace had a type of drug that could control a person's mind. At that time, the consequences would be too horrible to contemplate. Now, she was still fortunate if she was to end up in the Jade Lake's fairy's hand. Su Luo shivered a little. Alas, it was just like what she said before. Relying on a mountain, it collapses. Depending on a person, they run. The most dependable people and thing to rely on is herself. No good. She could not mope on like this. She must save herself. Su Luo, while being carried on Li Outyan's shoulder, her mind suffered from the invasion of cold air and worked somewhat slowly. Even then, she still thought of an idea that would not be considered a plan. Before, Su Luo had already tested it because she was a fire elemental system. Therefore, she could use her own fire system to melt this layer of ice. But what made her despair was that after she had tried hard for a long time, she only melted a little of the ice. If she was truly to thaw out at that time, the golden needles, one dish would be cold. By then, she would have already been peeled naked, broken into pieces, and put on display. However, Su Luo's slow brain finally worked out something right. She concentrated all of the spirit power from her fire system into her right hand. First, wherever the ice layer seemed to be, it was thinner relative to other places. Second, as long as there was an opportunity for her right hand to make a move, and as long as Li Outyan was unguarded, then there was still a chance for her to escape going to heaven in order to live. Therefore, while Li Outyan carried her with flying speed, hurrying on his journey to return, Su Luo merely held her breath, with rapt attention condensing all of her spirit power into her right hand. It would be difficult to thaw out her entire body, but if it was only one point, then it was not impossible. After approximately a little less than an hour had passed, up ahead was finally the gate to the main hall of the palace. The gate to the main hall was wide open, giving people an empty, bleak feeling. Su Luo saw this and couldn't help but sigh with sorrow and regret. She still remembered that less than a day ago, there were many people that stood in front of this gate to the main hall. Yet now, stepping out of the main hall's gate was only her and Li Outyan, two people. When Li Outyan stepped outside of the main hall's gate, there was only a little bit left of the layer of ice on Su Luo's palm. Because she didn't want Li Outyan to detect it, while Su Luo was thawing the ice layer, she also put away the water droplets into her space at the same time. This was the reason why Li Outyan still hadn't detected the thawing. However, after exiting the gate of the main hall, Li Outyan suddenly looked towards Su Luo. During the time he wanted to speak with her, from the corner of his eyes, he just so happened to see that her hand had broken through the layer of ice. Immediately, Su Luo's heart trembled apprehensively. No sooner said, and it happened. In a flash, Su Luo tossed that spirit pinball she had wanted to use countless times before, and only to got to use it now into the back of Li Outyan's collar. When she tossed out the spirit pinball, she also used her spirit power to ignite that spirit pinball. Loathsome girl, what did you do? It would never have occurred to Li Outyan that Su Luo actually still had the strength to resist. He used all of his strength to throw Su Luo, and she was tossed out heavily. The pitiful Su Luo, still in the form of an ice sculpture, landed heavily on the ground. Because the ground was smooth and flat, and Li Outyan's strength was also very strong, the pitiful Su Luo immediately slid to the fringe of the public square. Beyond the fringe of the public square was the endless ocean. If you were to ask whether Li Outyan was miserable or not, only the words super miserable could be used to describe him. The spirit pinball was a 7th-rank expert's last strike. How formidable was its strength? To say nothing of the fact that Li Outyan was only a 6th rank. In fact, when Su Luo tossed that spirit pinball into the back of his neck, he had already realized what it was. It was too late for him to think about it carefully. Subconsciously, he ran towards the sea. With the spirit pinball, only through jumping into water and utilizing the resistance of water would he have an opportunity to live. Bang! A loud, violent noise exploded on the surface of the sea. A joyful feeling flashed through Su Luo's heart. Li Outyan, don't tell me that this time, I still won't be able to blow you up to death. But celebrating too soon, things still could go wrong. This sentence came true in Su Luo's hand, and it was extremely fitting. 1. Golden needles is a type of dried flower known as the citron daylily that Chinese people use in their stir-fry. It is supposed to be good for your health. Chapter 429, A New Lease on Life. 1. Su Luo had celebrated too soon. Her good luck had all been consumed and used up from before. The remaining was all misfortune. The spirit pinball exploded with a tremendous might. Li Aoyin's entire person was blown until he couldn't be seen. However, Su Luo had overlooked the follow-up to after the spirit pinball exploded, and this follow-up had a huge effect on her. At the point of explosion, in that split second, one could see that in the surroundings, there was a huge wave immediately overflowing to the sky. It unfurled and swung up a huge mass of ocean spray. A crashing sound echoed, like a wild beast spreading open in all directions. Before, Su Luo had been heavily thrown away by Li Aoyin. Moreover, she had slid along the smooth surface of the public square to its fringe. In fact, at that time, Su Luo already had 1 foot placed horizontally over the sea surface. With only a slight blow of the wind, like the movement of a blade of grass, she would be blown into the sea water. Furthermore, right now, it was a huge wave that overflowed to the sky, carrying with it a cold wind that swept towards her. A shocked, terrified expression flashed through Su Luo's eyes. Her heart was so regretful that her intestines turned green. Finished. Finished. Those fingers that broke through the layer of ice tenaciously dug into the ground at the fringe of the public square. She simply joined all of her strength and used it. If she let go, she would drop into the sea. However, it was unfortunate that there were only 2 fingers that had broken through the layer of ice, and it was not her entire hand. Therefore, its strength seemed very small. When the screams of each and every ocean spray swept towards her, Su Luo had repeatedly persevered, but she couldn't continue to persevere on. The fingers broke away from the rock on the shore. Afterwards, she stared on helplessly, as she, in the state of an ice sculpture, with a thunderous splash sound, was directly swept up by the waves of the sea. The density of ice was lower than seawater, therefore Su Luo, in the state of an ice sculpture, floated on the sea surface and did not directly sink to the seafloor. This was the greatest luck among her misfortune. But what made her feel painful and tragic was the yacht that was just up ahead, was at a distance that was almost within reach. But with 1 slap from the ocean spray, she watched helplessly as she was washed away. She also looked on helplessly as she floated away in the opposite direction from where the yacht was anchored. She stared blankly as she anticipated her fate, on the verge of being set adrift on the sea surface. This was simply too heartbreaking, too depressing. Su Luo was so helpless that she almost cried. The East Sea was vast and had no boundary. Only heaven knew where she would be swept to. As long as she thought about this, immediately, 2 wide, noodle-like bands of tears silently flowed down on the face of the icebound Su Luo. However, what could merely 2 of her fingers do? Within this endless sea, she could only resign herself to her fate of drifting among the waves. In front of Mother Nature, her tiny speck of strength was completely without the ability to resist. The pitiful her was completely unaware that this was merely only the beginning of her misfortune. Now, it was nighttime. In the lonely night sky, not even the remnant of a star could be seen. Even the dim crescent moon was obstructed by thick layer of clouds. All around, it was pitch black. You couldn't even see the fingers on your hand in front of you. Su Luo's heart could said to be very sorrowful right now. Being slapped around by seawater, she was crooked to the east, then fell to the west in total disorder. It was fine if it was only drifting with the waves. But why even the opportunity to lie on the sea surface to enjoy the beautiful night scenery was not given to her? She didn't know what direction she was floating towards. Su Luo fell more and more into despair, gradually becoming somewhat sleepy. Yet, when Su Luo didn't expect it, an even more tragic thing happened. Suddenly a streak of lightning, as fast as a serpent dragon, left behind a harsh radiance when time was about to change in the horizon. Now, a bad premonition all of a sudden bubbled forth from her heart. It couldn't be what she thought it was, right? It couldn't be that bad, right? Could she just so happen to be in time for the raising waves of a tropical cyclone in the ocean? However, the most tragic thing didn't exist. What existed was only even more tragedy. It could be said that when a person was out of luck, even drinking water, food could get stuck in the cracks between the teeth. Su Luo was just such a model for that kind of person. Chapter 430. A New Lease on Life. 2. Very quickly, on the sea surface, lightning and thunder mixed together and a huge gale erupted. It was like a ferocious beast producing thunderous roars, making the people who heard it tremble with fear. The originally drowsy Su Luo was immediately startled awake. Just at this moment, lightning streaked past. Following right after was a scorched smell, then the thunder overhead directly smashed down. However, the peal of thunder left no time for her to prepare nor cover her ears. With an imposing and majestic manner, it directly struck on the ice sculpture of Su Luo. Fortunately, she was concealed away within a very thick layer of ice. Otherwise, a person would swiftly be hacked into a charred mess. But even so, it still scared Su Luo enough. One could only hear the surface layer of her ice sculpture issuing sizzling sounds of hiss that lingered on. Yet, this was merely the beginning. In this pitch-black night, Su Luo, who was floating on the sea surface, really, truly experienced what was called a hair-raising, violent tempest. She, who was frozen within the ice sculpture, could see through the layer of ice, the flashing lightning and rolling thunder with torrents of rain. She saw the lightning dancing in the horizon like a dragon serpent, bellowing and snarling. She saw the torrential rain pouring down in buckets and beating upon the sea surface, each and every one of them forming a deep hole. And her ice block was like a small skiff, slapped by the waves, rocking about and swaying, sliding to the east then falling to the west. When the huge waves swept her up, it was the same as being on a roller coaster. She was rolled up and lifted up high, nearly several tens of meters above the sea surface. When the huge wave rolled down, she was again heavily thrown down without the least bit of sympathy. Despite being hidden in the ice layer, Su Luo was still thrown about until she was dizzy and confused while being lightheaded. Su Luo felt that she had been forced to suffer extreme bitterness. At this moment, she was being slapped around and rammed until she simply didn't know her own orientation. She could only hope that she didn't get swept into the waterspout region. Otherwise, if she was sucked into the waterspout, then she really would be done for. This night, Su Luo could only helplessly allow the huge waves and the gale to ravage her. But she had no other alternative, so she could only try to find joy in the sorrow and think that this was a free-of-charge roller coaster in the ancient times. Fortunately, though, she was now frozen in a layer of ice. Her entire body was protected. The force of impact from the waves did not injure her. If not, this night would seriously be extremely difficult. Gradually, Su Luo started to feel the meaning of being trapped. The tide with the howling winds and torrential rain gradually settled down. Her psyche unwittingly relaxed, and her eyes started to close as she fell asleep. The she that had fallen asleep was completely unaware that a person was calling for her throughout this journey. When she opened her eyes once more, it was because she had been woken up by the burning sun. Su Luo opened her eyes to glance at the environment and her surroundings. Immediately, excitement flashed through her eyes. She actually caught sight of a black dot up ahead. Since she was separated from it by a large distance, she couldn't see it clearly. But to be able to see a black dot on the ocean's surface, it was either a vessel or an island. It was still much better when compared to just drifting aimlessly on the ocean. Su Luo used her 2 fingers and stroked forward with all her strength. Last night was filled with high wind and pressing waves. Her 2 fingers could not be used. But now, the waves on the sea surface were not that big. Su Luo continued to row forward with all her effort. With great difficulty, she rowed about 10 meters forward. Then, a wave came at her in a head-on collision. The pitiful Su Luo was immediately rolled backwards by about 20 meters by the wave. Su Luo's heart silently flowed with 2 noodle-like, broad strips of tears. But very quickly, she pulled herself together and spared no effort to move forward by row. Afterwards, another wave hit her head-on and pushed her back even further. Su Luo simply wanted to look up to the sky and hiss for a long time. What kind of toying with her was taking shape? Even using a swing was not played with this kind of method. Was it because before, she had overdrawn her good luck, so now she needed to use misfortune to settle the debt? It was simply too much. Su Luo angrily stuck up her middle finger at the heavens. Chapter 431, A New Lease on Life, 3. Also, didn't know whether or not it was because the heavens sensed Su Luo's furious intent. Not long after, the wind and waves on the ocean changed directions. The waves started to push at Su Luo's back, pushing her continuously forward. Could it be that the heavens finally grew some eyes, turning her extreme sorrow to joy? Finally, Su Luo's heart was somewhat satisfied. With the help of the tides, Su Luo's operation became much easier. The distance to that targeted black dot also become increasingly closer. Now, Su Luo could clearly see that this was indeed not some vessel, but rather a not very large, barren island. The barren island was surrounded with submerged rocks. These submerged rocks were regarded as the natural enemies of vessels. However, as far as she was concerned, they were of the greatest help to her. She looked on just as the wind direction was about to change. In order not to allow the previous tragedy to occur again, Su Luo used her 2 fingers to row, striving with everything she had to aim towards the shore. Whenever the tide would send her off with a push at her back to move forward, she would borrow its strength to rush forward. And when the tide had fallen back, she had a death grip on the surrounding rocks and wouldn't let go. Waiting for another set of waves to send her off, she would then once again strive to rush forward with all her strength. In this way, the cycle was repeated and efficiency was improved by a lot. She tried hard for about an hour, and just when Su Luo's 2 fingers were inflamed and about to rupture, she finally touched the beach. After being adrift on the ocean, she now truly perceived how beautiful it felt to have one's feet firmly planted on land. However, even if it was just floated onto the sandy beach, Su Luo was still in that ice sculpture condition. This was a fact she couldn't change. She also didn't know how hard this icy and snowy trap of Liaoyin's was. For this entire night, she had been blown by the wind, battered by the rain, and with lightning flashing and thunder rolling. Moreover, there were huge waves that overflowed to the sky, and she had been ravaged simultaneously under all these conditions. Yet, this ice sculpture was still as before, without a trace of thawing. Even though Su Luo never abandoned the idea of blowing it up with spirit power, but having tried hard for this long, she could only extend out a few fingers and nothing more. Her body was still as before, trapped inside, as if her entire body was cast in plaster. On the sandy shore, the seawater retreated. Su Luo was lying down, unmoving, with her head raised to look at the setting sun, her eyes silently shedding tears. How could she continue on like this? If she stayed too long inside the ice sculpture, her body also wouldn't be able to withstand it. Besides, what's more, since coming out of her closed-door cultivation to now, no water and rice had entered her. Now, her belly was positively starving, that it was directly making rumbling noises. The problem was that even if there were stuff to eat, now, her entire person was trapped within an ice sculpture, with no way for her to eat. Alas, when a person start to have bad luck, how could they be this feeble? Just when Su Luo was full of remorse, suddenly, she felt a shadow appear from above. Could it be that the sky would get dark this fast? Su Luo had no other choice but to open her eyes. How could it be possible? When she saw the person before her eyes, Su Luo felt it was simply too incredulous. She only saw his expensive and full of noble air, black-colored brocade robe, cut apart into pieces by the submerged rock. That peerlessly handsome face, that pair of demonically charming, peach blossom eyes that loved to smile, and also that perfect pair of moist lips. Now, it was just tilting up slightly, looking at her and smiling. Nangong Luyun? Su Luo simply could not believe it. This matter changed too fast. She simply had no time to react. Wasn't Nangong Luyun locked in the joyous conjugal room, Due to the Jade Lakes Fairies plan? How could he possibly appear here? Definitely, it was because she had been sunbathing for too long that she was faint with blurred vision, and thus the hallucination appeared, right? The next second, Su Luo wanted to reach out and rub her eyes, and annoyedly discovered that her right now like a mummy, she basically was unable to move. The corner of Nangong Liuyun's mouth was raised in a constipated smile, and acting as if taking things seriously, he even used a finger to tap the layer of ice. Pleased as punch, he gave one sentence in assessment. The quality is still not bad. Under the twilight of the setting sun, his overbearing tone also carried a touch of lazy flavor. And also, that annoying smile on his face. Even if she was transformed into ash, Su Luo was also unlikely to remember it wrongly. Chapter 432, A New Lease on Life. 4. This person was definitely Nangong Luyun, the authentic one. Now in the ice sculpture, how could Nangong Luyun neglect to take into account the most important point was to hurriedly get her out of there? Here Su Luo was nearly unable to hold back anymore, okay? Consequently, Su Luo scowled fiercely inside the ice sculpture as righteous indignation filled her chest and she shouted, "Why haven't you still let this young lady out?" Nangong Luyun gave a nefariously charming smile, slowly shaking his head. "Can't hear you. Courting death, aren't you?" Su Luo said in a rage. "Only if you promise this king one condition." Nangong Luyun very seriously sat down by Su Luo's side, turning his head to look at Su Luo with an appearance of sitting side by side, wanting to have a long talk. Su Luo was nearly close to being infuriated to death. What kind of time was this moment? And he was still playing this game with her. "Your words, this king can't hear, however. If you agree to the promise, then you can blink your eyes 3 times. Nangong Liuyun's somewhat pale face had a full, constipated smile. Su Luo's heart was indignant. This guy was simply profiting from her misfortune, and he still said he liked her. If he liked her, he should dash to her side and undo the layer of ice without saying anything further. "Oh dear, why do you like to stay inside? Then this king will sit here to accompany you." Nangong Liuyun's pair of hands intersected behind his head and at Su Luo's side. He laid on his back on the sandy beach. His smile was full of a demonic aura. Su Luo was simply defeated by him. A tiger that had fallen down to earth being insulted by dogs. This debt, she definitely will get it back. The corner of Nangong Liuyun's mouth hooked into a concentrated smile, holding his chin in a considering pose. "Oh dear. Thinking of what condition will be good? How about just letting you marry this king?" Seeing Su Luo's gaze betray an ominous glint, Nangong Liuyun's smile became even more devilishly charming and alluring. "No good, no good. It has a tone of bullying the weak. This king is definitely not Nangong Liujue, that useless person who would force a marriage. Okay, how about like this? You agree to try to be together with this king for 3 months. How about it? Try to be together for 3 months?" Su Luo frowned. Nangong Luyun saw that Su Luo was considering it. This meant that there was a chance. Consequently, he struck while the iron was hot and continued to hit the snake with a stick. "Just this, try to be together for 3 months. If when the time comes, you still don't like this king, then this king will absolutely not stick to you anymore. How about it?" But the way he pursued her would be changed to force. Su Luo, however, did not know Nangong Liuyun's shameless thought in his heart. She thought it over with rapt attention. If it was only 3 months, then that could be considered. Nangong Luyun pretended to be very bored as he tapped the layer of ice. The ice sculpture echoed, thud, thud. His smile was still devilishly charming while he raised an eyebrow and laughingly said, "This posture, this gay face is indeed rarely seen. Since you like to show it, then just..." This made Su Luo, who was lying in the ice sculpture, extremely vexed. She also knew that she had assumed the appearance and pose of the golden rooster standing on one leg, very comical and very funny. But how was she to know that back then, she would be frozen over? If she had known earlier, she would definitely have chosen a more perfect, beautiful posture. Pooh, pooh. If she had known earlier, when Nangong Luyun was there for support, she would have gotten rid of Liao Yin. Nangong Luyun took the opportunity to profit from her misfortune and added on additional promises and threats. His tone even carried a concerned flavor. Oh dear, looks like the tide is about to rise and fall again. With you like this, I'm afraid you will be swept away again, right? Su Luo's heart was extremely furious. In any case, everyone had known each other for this long. Must he force her to agree before being willing to give her a helping hand? He was simply a bandit, abominable and hateful. Su Luo was forced with no way out. She could only pant with rage and severely blinked her eyes 3 times towards him. Upon seeing this, the corner of Nangong Liuyun's mouth revealed a demonic smile of having gotten his way. He had an extremely joyful expression. Chapter 433, A New Lease on Life. 5. However, Su Luo waited for quite a while. Seeing that Nangong Luyun was still sitting there neatly, she couldn't help but frown. Afterwards, she carefully scanned his complexion. Before, she was too busy being mad that she didn't get a good look. Now that she looked at him carefully, she found that his complexion was not in a good condition. He was overly pale. Could it have anything to do with her vision being obstructed by the layer of ice? Su Luo thought with some doubts. After another long period had passed, Nangong Luyun finally got up. His palm flipped over with a flying gesture, continuously forming, one after another, fiery red-colored imprints. Specks of fiery blaze landed on the ice sculpture, letting the flames melt the layer of ice. Su Luo felt it was somewhat strange. Normally, according to Nangong Liuyun's strength, he shouldn't have just produced such small flames. He was much stronger compared to Liao Yin. Liao Yin was 6th rank while he was 7th rank. Liao Yin's heavenly dance of snowfall, as far as he was concerned, would only take a minute to undo. But now, it had been more than an hour. Nangong Luyun. The little flames he condensed out were still burning, making the length of time it persisted in undoing the ice excessively long. This night, in the end, what happened to his body? Could it be that just a moment ago when he was talking to her, it was for the purpose of stalling for time in order to restore the vital energy in his body? There was a myriad of thoughts in Su Luo's mind, with many huge question marks on top of her forehead. However, now, she was frozen over. No matter how you said it, she couldn't ask. She had no other choice but to wait patiently, to wait until she got out to ask. Approximately another hour passed. Suddenly, a thread of blood flowed out of the corner of Nangong Liuyun's mouth. Su Luo's mind was abruptly jolted. Nangong Luyun was certainly injured. Otherwise, breaking a layer of ice wouldn't injure him in this way. She shouted loudly for Nangong Luyun to stop, even though her voice couldn't be transmitted out, but she still kept on mouthing the words. Nangong Luyun wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth and only smiled faintly while saying one sentence. If I was to stop now, the agreement from a moment ago would be invalid. Su Luo was immediately anxious. Nangong Liuyun's condition right now was very bad. Even his body was tottering on the verge of collapse, so weak as to make a person's heart ache in distress. Even though all along, he had stubbornly propped himself up, but his hands trembled slightly, while cold sweat tumbled down drop by drop. Again, another hour passed. At last, the piece of ice layer finally broke off. All of a sudden, Su Luo's body regained its freedom. When Nangong Luyun saw Su Luo come out, he finally let out a breath of relief. His Luo girl had finally come out. Nangong Luyun had been full of dread for a period of time, and the soles of his feet staggered slightly. Su Luo threw herself at him, wanting to support him, but now, her limbs were still stiff, and as a result, the both of them tumbled down onto the sandy shore. Now, Nangong Luyun could not continue to suppress it, and he uttered heavy coughs. Along with the sound of coughing, fresh blood continuously spilled out of his mouth. One mouthful after another, the blood sprayed out as if he didn't want to live. Upon seeing this, Su Luo's heart was exceedingly distressed. but she was completely clueless and could only anxiously wait by his side. With great difficulty, she waited for him to finish throwing up blood, and only now was Su Luo able to support him up. Her eyes were full of heartache, on one hand helping him to wipe clean the bloodstain at the corner of his mouth, while also trying to stop him. I know that right now, you have a lot you want to say, but the timing is wrong. First, don't speak. You should properly rest and adjust your body. Nangong Liuyun's phoenix eyes blurred. He was half unconscious and half awake. He only looked at Su Luo while smiling and struggled to talk. You promised. This man, even at this moment, was still concerned about that promise. Even so, obviously, when he was about to die. Su Luo was so infuriated that she glared at him. Got it? The things Su Luo, promised? I will absolutely not renege on. Isn't it just 3 months? I've memorized it all. This matter of swindling her into an agreement of 3 months of commitment, she absolutely would demand this debt back. Chapter 434, A New Lease on Life. 6. Su Luo took out a cup of celestial spirit water from her space, and little by little, fed it into Nangong Liuyun's mouth. Come, drink this. At this point of time, Nangong Liuyun's behavior was very clever and obedient. He laid on Su Luo's lap, and following Su Luo's hand, he drank the water, one mouthful at a time, until it was gone. After drinking celestial spirit water, his complexion improved somewhat, his eyelids became increasingly heavy, and very quickly, he sank into a deep sleep. Only now did Su Luo have an opportunity to size up Nangong Liyun. His complexion at this moment was horribly pale. The clothing on his body was also rather conspicuously bedraggled. His pair of hands had been soaked in seawater until they were swollen. Compared to that noble and arrogant His Highness Prince Jin from before, it was two entirely different people. In fact, Su Luo really wanted to ask, in the end, did something take place in the joyous conjugal room? But faced with Nangong Liyun like this, she felt that asking him this sentence was an insult to him. She continued to take care of him and did not sleep for that night. Early morning on the second day, under the first light of dawn, the two people slowly, while turning about, started to wake up. After drinking that cup of celestial spirit water, Nangong Liuyun's mental alertness had improved somewhat. Nonetheless, his complexion was still as horribly pale as before, seemingly about to collapse from excessive blood loss. When Su Luo opened her eyes, she saw his body leaning on its side, one hand supporting his forehead. His gaze was earnestly and seriously sizing her up. The him right now was like a gentle and tender fire. Su Luo rubbed her eyes and grumbled a verse. "What are you doing?" Nangong Liyun seemed to be a little unhappy, and as before, glared at Su Luo in a huff. Su Luo was even more bewildered. First thing in the morning, why was it that this man was like a little child again? What was he getting petulant about? However, seeing that he had suffered a heavy injury, Su Luo did not begrudge his manner. She merely asked one sentence. In the end, what are you mad about? Nangong Liyun did not speak, flattened his mouth, not speaking. He used his eyes to convey his complaint. Su Luo was simply somewhat at a loss, asking him and he won't speak. Then, what else could be done? Su Luo helplessly stretched. Rubbing her belly, she said, "Very hungry." Nangong Liyun somewhat very fiercely said, "Su Luo, from now on, you are not allowed to say you are hungry to a man." Su Luo somewhat perplexedly looked at him. Only allowed to say it to this king. Nangong Liyun said, full of arrogance and with a lovable overtone. Such behavior. Su Luo irritatedly snorted. Compared to before when she was trapped like a mummy in the ice sculpture, the feeling at this moment of having her feet planted on solid ground was really great. Su Luo inhaled a deep breath of fresh and clean air and turned around to ask Nangong Liyun, "Is your body a little better? Now you know to be concerned about this king?" Humph, too late. Nangong Liyun turned his face away. Su Luo was made amused by his childishness. Was it possible that he was peeved in the early morning because she didn't seem concerned about him? Yet last night, She had clearly kept a watch on him for a night, until finally, she couldn't remain awake and fell into a deep sleep. Su Luo gave him a quick stare. I was concerned about you all along, okay? Don't be so lacking in conscience like this. She used a nice tone and good mood to coax him. He was still throwing a tantrum, but with Su Luo glaring at him, it had obtained an entirely different result. All of a sudden, Nangong Luyun sat up with a happy expression across his entire face, full of conceit. Say it. In what ways were you concerned about this king? Does preparing to find food for you count? Su Luo did not feel like competing with this childish man. He merely looked at her with that pale face lacking any blood. Don't know why, but in the depths of her heart, pain still gripped it tightly. I want to eat kanji. Nangong Luyun made a request and still seriously reminded her. Shredded chicken kanji that is boiled very thick and sticky. Yesterday, he was still in an unconscious state with an about-to-die appearance. Today, he was immediately in great spirits. Chapter 435. A New Lease on Life. 7. Su Luo exasperatedly rolled her eyes at him and then pointed to the surroundings. Your Highness Prince Jean Darling, trouble you to open your noble eyes and see what kind of place this is. Still want shredded chicken kanji? If you have the resourcefulness, then transform some rice out, okay? Don't you have space? Nangong Luyun said it, as if it was obvious. But I didn't store any rice in my space. Su Luo very naturally responded to his question. Nangong Luyun immediately grabbed onto the critical part of the problem and sharply pointed straight at the main point. Don't tell me, you didn't put any food in your space? Su Luo's expression froze for a second. Slowly and seriously, she nodded her head. Yes, besides water, there aren't any edible things. Well, aside from a few steamed buns she had tossed inside from long ago. Only, it was a pity that it had already become hard and ruined beyond recognition. Su Luo thought about it and still took out those 2 steamed buns and handed it over to Nangong Luyun. How about you first make do and eat a little? Nangong Luyun turned his face away in disdain. Arrogantly and in a pampered manner, said, This king is a sick patient. This king wants to eat food Luo girl, personally prepared with her hands. Su Luo suddenly felt helpless. She placed her hand between her eyebrows, as though shielding from the sun, and gazed in all 4 directions. This was a desolate island. Their current position was at a sandy beach. A few kilometers past this was an area of continuous, unending, mountainous forest. The mountainous forest was tree-lined, appearing full of vitality. Presumably, there would be at least some bird-like creatures, right? I'll go into the woods to look and see if I can find some food to bring back. Su Luo said softly. This king will follow along with you. Nangong Luyun stood up, but was somewhat unsteady on his feet. Su Luo, with one move, supported him. Don't randomly move about. Your body is still weak. It's best that you rest here. Nangong Luyun rather anxiously watched her, and said wretchedly and pitifully, At any time, a wild animal could appear here. Can it be that you want to toss this king aside to stay here and perish on his own? Aren't you going to protect this king? Su Luo was simply speechless. In the end, who was protecting whom? Who would dare to protect you, a 7th-rank expert? Su Luo exasperatedly rolled her eyes, turned around and was about to leave. Nangong Luyun faintly said to her back, What if this king is not at 7th rank? His voice was very low. His mood seemed to be very gloomy and downcast. But Su Luo heard it very clearly. Not a 7th rank? Su Luo immediately turned around and looked at him with deep concern, while her mouth repeated, Not a 7th rank? What does this mean? Nangong Liuyun's eyelid lowered slightly, and in a low voice he said, Just the literal meaning of the words, therefore. This king now needs your protection. You can't cast aside and not take care of this king. Was he using an excuse to hang on to her? Sure enough, while speaking, Nangong Luyun also grabbed hold of the corner of her clothing. His entire person was leaning on her shoulder, giving off an appearance of being completely dependent on her. He was moving to put his shamelessness in action. She couldn't very well push and injured him away, right? Simply a master that was too difficult to serve. Su Luo had no choice but to support him as they walked in the direction of the mountainous forest. Along the way, she talked to Nangong Luyun while carefully observing his bearing. Afterwards, she couldn't help but frown. At this point of time, Nangong Luyun's footsteps were weak and unstable. Not to speak of a 7th rank, he couldn't even be compared to her, a 3rd rank. Okay? Su Luo thought about it. Finally, she still had to ask. Last night, in the end, what really happened? Nangong Luyun puffed up and gave a snort. Finally, you want to ask? This king was under the impression that you would still endure it for a long while. Not even a little curious, not even a little bit concerned about him. She was also not that least bit interested in asking him about being locked in the joyous conjugal room with another woman. This bastard had already known earlier that she was curious and deliberately waited until she asked. Chapter 436, A New Lease on Life, 8. Nangong Luyun was causing trouble for her, forcing her to build up mental preparation for a long time. Afraid that with one short, careless sentence from her, it would injure his overly sensitive heart. Now, this bastard actually was still striking a pose over there. Su Luo crossly glared at him. Stop keeping me in suspense, quickly explain, quickly speak. The fiercer and more solemn Su Luo's tone was when interrogating. The bigger Nangong Luyun's smiling expression became. With his hand behind his back, he raised an eyebrow and said with an air of complacency, "Really want to know? Of course I want to know. Even a Buddha, one, would also have a curious heart, okay? Why do you want to know?" Nangong Luyun said it very lightly, still carrying some of that smiling expression, and leisurely asked. Su Luo saw that he had a calm and composed appearance. Her heart was indignant and she snorted twice. Are you going to say it or not, in the end? So long-winded. Nangong Luyun merely cast her an unhurried glance. Leaning close to her ear, he teasingly said, "In fact, what you really wanted to ask is whether this king finally lost his virginity, right? This person was still really so hardcore, brazenly thick-skinned, able to shock a person to death from his endless speech. But to put it bluntly, wasn't this what she wanted to ask? Certainly, if she was to admit it, wouldn't it be her covertly admitting that she cared about his purity? Wasn't this tantamount to her covertly admitting she had an interest in him, as if she would let him be smug? Su Luo turned her face away. Why would I be concerned about this thing of yours? Why should I care if you had lost your virginity or not? What I am concerned about is, how did you find me? This issue was also very crucial. After all, she was completely swept away by the wind and battered by the rain. In addition, last night's rising waves were high and rapid. Under this kind of being adrift among the waves, he unexpectedly could find her. She couldn't help but say this was miraculous. Suddenly, Nangong Luyun's expression darkened, although he was smiling happily just a moment ago. His hand which held hers gripped so tightly that Su Luo grimaced in pain. Su Luo glared at him with a wrathful expression. Was this person really heavily injured? How could his strength be this great? Nangong Luyun leaned close to her ear, whispering like the twittering of a bird. His manner was tender, but gave a person a kind of terrible feeling. Luo girl, the sentence you just said, this king does not like. His heated breath lingered on her sensitive ear. Su Luo instinctively shifted to the side, but Nangong Luyun used his strength to give a tug, pulling her into his embrace. The tip of Su Luo's nose bumped into his chest very heavily. The bump made her nose very sore, so painful as to make the rim of her eyes all red. Without waiting for her to cover her nose, one of Nangong Luyun's bony fingers tipped up her pure white, tapered chin, and he bent over quickly to kiss her lips. His kiss was overbearing and intense, possessing a franticness as he plundered and besieged her lips. Su Luo was immediately distracted from her original thought. She only tasted the sweet scent in her mouth, a kind of limp and numbing feeling filling her whole body. She was distracted like this for a split second. Then she immediately returned to her senses. At once, instinctively, she pushed him away energetically. She didn't expect that this time she was able to push Nangong Luyun away so easily. Moreover, it wasn't limited to just pushing him away. Her push made Nangong Luyun reel about, swaying and shaking until he fell against an ancient tree at the side. With a bump sound, the back of his head knocked against the trunk of the ancient tree. Momentarily, it hurt so much that he grimaced in pain. He inhaled a breath of cold air and covered his chest while he glared at Su Luo. Damned girl. You want to kill your own husband? Who told you to indiscriminately and lightly hug other people? Su Luo aggressively returned his glare with her own. However, seeing him collapse and hanging onto the tree while panting bluntly, in the end, her endurance was defeated. She moved closer to him due to having a guilty conscience and softly asked, "That is, are you all right?" Nangong Luyun gave 2 snorts and turned his head away, refusing to acknowledge her. Could it be he wouldn't even speak to her? A feeling of remorse flashed through Su Luo's heart, her heart becoming increasingly regretful. 1. Even a Buddha. The Chinese here literally translates to Taoist/Taoist immortal, but the English meaning is more like saying even a saint. So I used Buddha as the equivalent to Western saints. Chapter 437. A New Lease on Life. 9. In the end, how do you feel? Do you need to drink water? A kiss was just a kiss. It was not like she hadn't been kissed before. Why would her reaction be so huge? Moreover, Nangong Luyun was already wounded so heavily. Su Luo's heart was extremely regretful. As a result, she was even more eagerly attentive around him, staying by his side and pampering him. Anyway, Nangong Luyun was a typical case of giving sunshine and he would shine type. The more Su Luo hovered around and pressed him, the more he would actually climb all over her. He still refused to answer her. When Su Luo was on the left side, his head would slant to the right. Su Luo then ran to the right side, and his face again inclined to the left. Indeed, a child's bad disposition. How could it be this awkwardly difficult? Su Luo could only reduce her anger. She pulled at his sleeves and apologized to him in a low voice. Okay, I was wrong. I should not have pushed you. Stop being angry, okay? Only now did Nangong Luyun turn around to glare at her and severely remind her. This king is injured. Yes. Su Luo acted well-behaved, like a waiter in a shop. This king is a sick patient. Nangong Luyun complained once more. I know. Su Luo parroted in haste. From her previous world to this world, killing a person, to her, was as simple as eating a meal, but she really didn't have a lot of experience dealing with a brat. Forget it, she would just start from Nangong Luyun. This bastard, all right. Finished complaining, Nangong Luyun was still rather unhappy. One could see him covering his chest, fuming and glaring at Su Luo. Since you know, why do you still not know what to do? How to do it? Su Luo, with a signboard that said obedient, suspiciously shot him a glance. Nangong Luyun arrogantly, and in a spoiled manner, lifted his chin. He cast a meaningful glance at her. Don't you know to make it up to me? How to make it up to you? Speak clearly. Couldn't he say a complete sentence? If it was not for the fact that he was wounded, she would have already walked away after an explosion. Seeing Su Luo's somewhat impatient manner, Nangong Luyun immediately acted like he had been wronged. That pair of peach blossom-like eyes cast a glance at Su Luo with a faint blaming expression. Injured someone, and don't even know to kiss it as compensation. This appearance was simply as pitiful as a young wife who had been subjected to bullying. My dear Highness Prince Jean, you just happen to be His Highness Prince Jean. Don't adopt the expression of a young wife having been bullied, all right? Seeing this made her feel as though she was simply guilty of terrible crimes, don't you think? Su Luo immediately became irascible, but, coming into contact with that pair of huge eyes that could clearly distinguish between right or wrong, and also that about to collapse pale face, Su Luo admitted. She lost, truly defeated by him. Su Luo moved closer towards his cheeks, sweeping past a kiss that was like a dragonfly lightly touching the water. Afterwards, she helplessly asked, "This time it should be all right. Who would have thought that this bastard was still dissatisfied and this picky? It's not that place. Looking to be spanked, right?" Su Luo feigned anger to glare at him. Su Luo at last fumbled out rules to his behavior. When dealing with a brat, she shouldn't have given him face, so as to avoid him taking advantage of her weakness. Nangong Luyun, this bastard, was equivalent to a brat, so she must give him the same treatment as a brat. Nangong Luyun felt aggrieved as he looked at her, accusing her, and with a hand covering his chest, he refused to get up. It was early morning. She hadn't eaten any boiled rice for a few days. She was already starving to the point of collapse, and this bastard was still stirring up trouble. Immediately, Su Luo's face darkened. As she reached out a hand to pull him up, "Stop whining. I know you are all right. Quickly get up so we can continue the journey." However, Nangong Luyun continued to cover his chest, not even taking any notice of Su Luo. "What else are you unsatisfied with?" Su Luo impatiently and helplessly crouched in front of him. "What's wrong with your chest? Don't tell me you really are wounded?" While speaking, Su Luo reached out with her hand to lift open his embroidered robe. "Don't!" Nangong Luyun pulled at her hand, stopping her, swaying and shaking as he was about to stand up. Chapter 438, A New Lease on Life. 10. Him being like this, instead made Su Luo even more curious. With one move, she pulled open Nangong Liuyun's clothing at the front of his chest. Nangong Liuyun's reaction was very big and he gave a loud shout, "Female pervert." However, when she saw the wound on Nangong Liuyun's chest, in a split second, Su Luo's nose soured and tears directly tumbled down. That originally the sparkling and translucent skin that was like jade on his chest was currently covered in sinister cuts. The most serious wound was from a sword cut that began from the left side of his chest and slanted towards the right abdomen. This wound was at least 20 centimeters long. The skin and flesh on both sides turned outwards, and she could see the bloody slit in the middle. After passing through and being immersed in seawater, that cut was even more terribly sinister. Seeing it made Su Luo's hair stand up. She immediately supported him to sit down once more, reproaching and criticizing him. "Do you know how serious this wound is? Why still insist on concealing it from me?" The rim of Su Luo's eyes were slightly red. A strong sense of being choked by sobs was in her voice. A devilish smile appeared on Nangong Liuyun's wan face. Finally saw Su girl sniveling. "So hard to come by. Do you really not know that this king concealed it, just because I want your heart to give birth to guilt?" Already reached this point, still teasing her, recalling that just a moment ago, she had sent a fist which heavily smashed into his chest to push him away. Suddenly, Su Luo's heart ached sorely, and she said a sentence in a low voice. "Nangong, I am sorry. Don't ever say I am sorry to this king. This king doesn't need these 3 words. Nangong Luyun tenderly caressed her face. "As long as you obediently stay by this king's side, then you will never need to say these 3 words. Su Luo was crouching in a kneeling position in front of him. Hesitating for a moment, she finally still nodded her head and asked with deep concern, "How is this wound of yours? What kind of medicine does it need?" It was a pity that even though she was an elementary apothecary, the time she had dealt in it was still short, so her foundation was still not firm yet. Nangong Luyun, with Su Luo's help, slowly stood up. "Blood-clotting pill. There should be medicinal herbs in this mountain." Nangong Luyun raised his head to look at the color of the sky and said to Su Luo, "First, let's look for a place to settle down. It's almost about to rain." Su Luo raised her head and looked at the sky. Not a cloud could be seen in the azure sky. The clear sky was bathed in a blue-green color. Where did it even have the appearance of being about to rain? However, since Nangong Luyun said it like this, he definitely had his reasons. Su Luo nodded her head. "Okay, we won't be leaving this uninhabited island in a short period of time." We ought to find a place to stay and settle down. Su Luo gave Nangong a guilty glance. He was injured this severely, and she also didn't know when he overtook her and found her on this uninhabited island. This week, yet he still risked his life, receiving more internal injuries to rescue her from that layer of ice. Yet, she only. Nangong Luyun pinched her nose. His smile was devilishly charming and enchanting. With the corner of his lips raised slightly said, "Since you feel sorry for this king, then from now on, you should wait upon this king properly. You can't resist a second time. Humph, humph." Saying this, he pulled at Su Luo's slender shoulder, and nearly all his weight was transferred to and being supported by Su Luo's body. He had an appearance of being about to collapse and faint at any time. Really was putting his words into action. Suddenly, Su Luo could not help but force a smile. How could she still dare to push him away? Su Luo could only slowly move forward while half hugging and half supporting him. Rather, the other person was so happy that his phoenix eyes were almost closed together, content and relaxed. They didn't walk for long before Nangong Liyun's footsteps paused slightly, and he pointed in a direction for Su Luo. Su Luo followed along his line of sight and looked. She saw a cave hidden under a drooping wisteria tree. It seemed that even though he received a severe wound, Nangong Liyun's insights were still as sharp as before. "I'll go and take a look." Su Luo leaned Nangong Liyun against an ancient tree and diligently instructed him with this sentence. A smile was exposed at the corner of Nangong Liyun's mouth. Chapter 439. A New Lease on Life 11. The cave was concealed by the wisteria tree and thorny undergrowth. If you didn't carefully survey it, you certainly wouldn't be able to see it. Su Luo lifted up the grassy vine and exposed a narrow cave entrance that would barely allow two people to enter side by side. Su Luo lit a torch, holding it high. She carefully and cautiously moved forward. At this moment, she had an unsurpassed wish and hope that the little divine dragon would wake up. She was accustomed to his existence. Not having him at her side was really inconvenient. She walked about 20 meters in the winding cave. Up ahead, all of a sudden, it opened up into a wide clearing. This rock formation was approximately 20 square meters of level ground, completely empty with nothing around. However, the atmosphere was dry without any unusual smell. It was already pretty good that they could find a place that could block the wind and protect them from the rain. Also, Su Luo didn't have expectations that were too high, so she immediately took the opportunity to tidy up the surrounding environment once through. Afterwards, she began to inspect the things in her space. She remembered that she had laid out a yellow rosewood bed in her space, as well as an entire set of bedding. After a look, sure enough, it was there, and immediately, Su Luo became happy. She took out the yellow rosewood bed and arranged it against the wall with the mattress, pillows, etc., and everything available that was needed. Owing to her previous world's experiences, her adaptability to new environments was very high, so living here would not be a big deal to her. But Nangong Luyun right now was wounded very seriously. If she was able to make him more comfortable, then Su Luo was naturally willing to do so. She tidied it up once and saw that this place already had the flavor of a little home. Su Luo satisfiedly nodded her head, then went out to look for Nangong Luyun. When she came out, she didn't see Nangong Luyun and immediately became somewhat anxious. Yet, before she could shout out for him, Nangong Luyun then slowly walked out from behind the tree, looking at her with a smile. Didn't take a rest properly and still arbitrarily walking everywhere? Su Luo very naturally reached out her hands to help him. Nangong Luyun immediately went into a state of collapse. Hugging her tightly and walking with lame and staggering steps, he followed her into the cave. 3 black lines was immediately erected on top of Su Luo's forehead. Could the change in his face be even quicker? Su Luo supported him as they walked inside. While walking, she curiously asked him, "A moment ago, where did you go?" Nangong Luyun unhappily glanced at her. Ultimately, he merely smiled. Looking for medicinal herbs, Su Luo saw his completely empty hands and just knew he definitely did not find it. While conversing, they finally arrived inside. When Nangong Luyun saw the comfortable and warm arrangement inside, immediately, he became happy and a beaming light flashed through his eyes. Is this meant to be entering the bridal chamber for the wedding festivities? Why are you indulging in flights of fancy? Su Luo pushed him onto the soft, spongy bed while she sternly commanded, "Take off your clothes." Nangong Luyun nervously grabbed the front of his clothing, like a young lady being threatened by a bandit. With some alarm, he raised his head to look at her. What are you going to do?" He really loved to act. He managed to make it seem as if she was about to rape him. Su Luo, who was forced to play the role of a bandit, had both hands at her hips. Quite speechlessly, she looked to the sky. Could your imagination still be even a little more abundant? Do you still want medicine to be applied or not? Apply medicine? Nangong Luyun suspiciously shot a glance at Su Luo. Yeah. Su Luo held out a cup of celestial spirit water from her space. It's more accurate to say washing your wound. Sit up properly, don't move. Nangong Luyun sat by the headboard and adorably let Su Luo help him untie his belt. Seeing the ghastly sight of his wound, Su Luo once again felt her nose going sour, and with a strong nasal sound, she said, "The wound that had been soaked by seawater is rotting. The best way is to cut away the rotting flesh, otherwise, it would be very difficult to heal." Nangong Luyun raised an eyebrow and smiled, unhurriedly saying, "It would be very painful." Yes. However, if Luo girl agrees to one of this king's conditions, then I may consider it, Nangong Luyun leisurely said. Chapter 440. A New Lease on Life. 12. Su Luo suddenly felt powerless. This man would seriously want a mile when given an inch. In the end, whose body was injured, and still asking for conditions left and right. But she also couldn't speak to berate him. If she reprimanded him, he would absolutely have the ability to swiftly accuse her with his hidden bitterness. You say it and we'll see. Su Luo had one hand on her waist as she helplessly glanced at him. Nangong Luyun happily patted the carving on the large yellow rosewood bed. Accompany this king tonight to sleep together. Su Luo refused to acknowledge him, carrying the celestial spirit water. She sat on the edge of the bed and asked, "If I don't promise?" Nangong Luyun very unhappily humph. Then this king refuses to be treated. That is your body. Why is it that you don't care a bit about it? Su Luo rolled her eyes at him. With you being concerned, it is enough. Nangong Luyun continued and added smoothly. This was putting the blame on her head? Su Luo suddenly felt at a loss for words as she cast sidelong glances at him. Are you putting the blame on me? Nangong Luyun even nodded very seriously, and with a deadly earnest tone, said, "This king is a sick person. A sick person is the most important." Su Luo was simply completely defeated by him. She really wanted to take a picture of his now fuming appearance and distribute it throughout the entire nation, thus allowing everyone to see the distinctly cold, noble, and insufferably arrogant His Highness Prince Jean that was in their hearts, after all, had what kind of childish conduct in private. Su Luo slanted a cold glance at him. "Don't be too excessive, or else I will abandon you without a care." This king's Luo girl wouldn't do it. Nangong Luyun playfully and arrogantly raised an eyebrow. "Who said I won't? Now, I will disappear for you to see." Su Luo placed the celestial spirit water in his hand, then turned around and walked out. Nangong Luyun watched Su Luo's back as she left. Momentarily, his eyes drooped with a lonely expression. Su Luo was not really angry with Nangong Luyun. Rather, she had recalled that if it were scraping away the flesh to heal, she must first refine the blood-clotting pill. The necessary herbal ingredients for the blood-clotting pill were not difficult to find. Su Luo wandered around the mountain in a circle, and in less than an hour, she had returned after finding all of them. Su Luo also didn't need to refine it herself. She put all those medical herbs in her space, Letting her spirit enter to refine it was just fine. As a result, the Su Luo-shaped spirit inside her space was occupied with refining the medicinal pill, while the Su Luo outside her space was also not idle, occupied with searching for food. The herbal ingredients were not difficult to find, but, as for food, it truly stumped her. This uninhibited island didn't even have a single magical beast. At first, she even thought to look for a magical beast to butcher for barbecue, to make a large and sumptuous meal. Su Luo searched around and only found a few wild fruit trees. There weren't that many fruits on the trees, only a scarce, several tins of them. Su Luo picked a few and tasted the berries, and she discovered that the taste could be considered not bad. Then, she picked all the berries in one breath and placed it in her space, even if it was a larger amount. She was also not worried about them not fitting. With this kind of thinking, space was simply essential for leaving home to travel. It was something that people would kill for. Still, only having wild fruit would be unable to appease one's hunger. There weren't any magical beasts, but the sea must have seafood, right? Su Luo eagerly ran to the seashore again. Her luck could also be considered excellent. On the beach, some oysters were sporadically scattered about. An oyster was also commonly referred to as the live oyster. In the modern world, it was good stuff. With diced, fragrant garlic placed on top, then baking it on a fire, it would certainly be extremely appetizing. Su Luo collected all of it, filling half a small bucket with live oysters. Nangong Lu Yun was injured, so she ought to stew some fish soup to nourish him. Su Luo was just thinking of going to capture some, but then she suddenly recalled previously the amethyst-thorned fish she had hooked. She had practically moved a small portion of it into her own space. She had several hundreds of fishes. After a rough count, she had actually forgotten about this. Su Luo slapped her head, thinking that this elm tree-like head of hers had certainly been frozen silly by the ice. Such a good treasure. Unexpectedly, she hadn't thought of it before. Chapter 441. A New Lease on Life. 13. Su Luo very quickly returned to the cave again. With a glance, she saw Nangong Lu Yun sitting near the headboard of the bed in a daze. The outline of his face from one side was as fine as that of the ancient Greek gods, making people unable to look away after just a quick glance. "What are you thinking about?" Su Luo held her hand and waved it in front of his face. Nangong Lu Yun saw that it was Su Luo. He clearly released a relieved breath of air, but immediately after, he humphed 2 times in a huff. Su Luo was already familiar with his arrogant and spoiled temperament like the back of her hand, so she also did not get angry. She sat by his side with a smile and took out the blood-clotting pill she had already refined. "Everything is ready. Now I can start to treat your injuries. You are willing to come back?" Nangong Lu Yun swept a glance at her. His tone was somewhat displeased, but she could hear no coldness in it. "How could I truly walk away? I went looking for medicinal herbs and food for you." Su Luo took out all kinds of stuff from inside her space like performing conjuring tricks, piling it up one after another on the ground. Nangong Lu Yun didn't even cast a glance at it. He changed his position and moved sideways to her, facing the weeds in the corner. Su Luo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She reached out with her hands and untied his belt again. Seeing that sinister wound gaping open outwards, Su Luo's nose soured and asked, "Does it still hurt?" Her voice was somewhat hoarse, with a heavy nasal twang. Nangong Lu Yun cast a quick glance at her, but once again, he looked away. "You don't care about this king anyway. Even if I die from pain, it has nothing to do with you." Su Luo knew that this man was acting out in a fit of being peeved. Really an arrogant, spoiled, stingy man who likes to be jealous and peeved. Su Luo didn't pay any attention to him. She minded her own business of preparing well the implements needed to treat his injuries. After she sterilized the dagger with a fireball, Su Luo took out that blood-clotting pill and handed it over to Nangong Lu Yun. "Swallow it?" Although Nangong Lu Yun still ignored her, he still opened his mouth like a well-behaved child. Looking at him, Su Luo didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and had no alternative but to stroke his head, coaxing him with a nice tone and a very good mood. Fine, fine. I promise you, in the future, without your permission, I will not go out alone, okay? She had actually known from the beginning that he was pretending to be foolish and acted cute and peeved. However, he was only waiting for a promise from her. So, finally, she still spoke out that sentence he loved to hear. Nangong Luyun nevertheless indifferently said, "This king is not forcing you. It is you who volunteered." Su Luo started to smile. I know, it is I who volunteered." Only then did Nangong Luyun cheer up. He raised an eyebrow and looked at Su Luo. "This is more like it. Give him an inch, and he'll want a mile." Su Luo didn't feel like reasoning with him once more, and she merely mildly said a phrase. "Lie down well, I'm about to cut it." The dagger glittered like frost and snow, glowing with a deep, cold radiance. He took off his clothing, revealing that sinister wound on his chest. Nangong Luyun shot a quick glance at Su Luo and frowned. "If it leaves behind a scar, you must take responsibility." Su Luo speechlessly nodded her head. "You must not scorn me because you dislike it." Nangong Luyun thought a bit and added another sentence. Su Luo once again nodded with strong emphasis. "Got it, you really are long-winded." Su Luo was considered to be very fearless, but the person before her eyes was Nangong Luyun. When she started to act, her hands still unavoidably trembled a little. A single cut sliced past. Fresh blood immediately came out like a violent storm. Su Luo saw this and her nose couldn't help but sour. Her head inclined to one side to look at Nangong Luyun. And yet, Nangong Luyun, at this time, didn't even let out a groan. The corner of his mouth was plastered with an unrestrained, indifferent smile. He unblinkingly watched Su Luo. That expression, that attitude, was satisfied and serious. The seriousness in his eyes were like looking at a precious treasure of a lifetime. His silhouette was as perfect as the gods, refined like being cut from a fine blade, world-shakingly handsome, with sharp eyebrows and star-like eyes. He was extraordinarily talented and bright, with his entire person glistening and dazzling, emitting a godlike splendor, commanding people so they could not look away. Chapter 442, A New Lease on Life, 14. The sharp dagger sliced through, cutting open skin and flesh. Under the circumstances of not having any anesthesia, how could it not hurt? Su Luo clearly saw Nangong Luyun's forehead steeped with a thin layer of perspiration, making his complexion even paler than before. He was as pale as paper, completely lacking any color. His disheveled long hair was soaked with sweat, draped loosely over his broad shoulder. However, the corner of his mouth was raised in a light, pure smile, appearing like the soft clouds and gentle breeze, seemingly unconcerned. He unblinkingly gazed at her, so tenderly, so intoxicating and seemingly drowning in love. Su Luo's gaze collided with his, her heart moved with thump sounds. In a flash, she returned to her body and continued the actions of her hands. Seeing that skin riddled with scars, a murderous aura flitted through Su Luo's eyes. "What happened last night?" Su Luo asked for the third time. Several times before, Nangong Luyun had avoided it all by not responding, but now, in order to divert his attention, Su Luo mentioned it again. Because just wait until she sprinkled the powdered blood-clotting pill on the wound. That was when it would truly hurt. A trace of contemplation flashed across Nangong Luyun's devilishly bewitching face. His smile was brimming with an extremely sinister expression. "You should be at ease. If this king's body is to be ruined, then it will be ruined by Luo girl's hand. How could it be given to other people? What kind of words were these?" Making it seem as if she would use very ruthless methods to deflower him. Su Luo irritatedly glared at him. "Then how did you escape from there?" "The traps in the Amethyst Fish Palace. How difficult was it to deal with?" Since he was locked in the joyous conjugal room, if he wanted to come out safely, then it was almost impossible. Recalling the scene at that time, Nangong Liuyun's devilishly bewitching eyes sank down slightly. His face was brimming with an extremely sinister smile. At that time, this king was determined to preserve the purity of my body and to offer it in faith to my family's little Luo Luo. How could I not come out? How did you get wounded to this extent? The dagger in Su Luo's hand swept past, and another piece of rotting flesh was sliced off. Nangong Liuyun's brows didn't even crease. His face still had that pale smile, as he slowly said, "Merely a scuffle." Within that joyous conjugal room, besides having sexual intercourse, there was also a second alternative you could choose. It was actually a straightforward transformation into humanoid. Gentle, warm, and soft words, with a devilishly alluring smile, but the perspiration on his forehead had condensed into beads, with each of them tumbling down. Su Luo's nose soured and she turned her face away, pretending that she didn't see. She increased the speed of her hands' movements while she continued to draw him to talk. What kind of transformation into humanoid? This, simply put, is a fight with yourself. Nangong Liuyun's eyes blurred, and he was feeling somewhat dizzy. Yet he was still smiling. His smile was pale and weak. How does one fight oneself? Su Luo took a glance at him and again concentrated on the task at hand. Nangong Liyun thought about it, saying it little by little. Inside was very strange. It had another simulated me. This person, whether it was his spirit strength, style, and even thinking, were all at the peak state of perfection, very difficult to deal with, right? Unexpectedly, there would be this kind of strange thing? Could still imitate a person like this? When all was said and done, was this still in ancient times or leaning towards the modern world? Su Luo was immediately depressed. Since it was like that, then how could you win the fight? Su Luo paused a little. She directly pinched the blood-clotting pill into fine powder and sprinkled it on his wound that was violently gushing out fresh blood. The wound immediately issued out sizzling sounds. It had a similar effect to pouring sulfuric acid on it. In an instant, Nangong Liuyun's complexion went deathly white. He sucked in a deep breath of air and forcibly ignored the excruciating pain that shot through his mind. His smile was light and sluggish, but still enchanting. Also didn't look to see. Who is this king Hao? Could not win the fight. Fighting with the most perfect version of himself, if it was not as dangerous as risking his life, how could he have come out? Chapter 443. A New Lease on Life, 15. Then, you came out. What about the Jade Lakes Ferry? Su Luo couldn't help but ask. Nangong Liyun was perplexed for a split second. He thought for a long time before remembering. Oh, are you talking about her? Don't know. What? Don't know. Su Luo was shocked, unwaveringly staring at Nangong Liyun. The dagger in her hand distractedly sliced by, leaving a cut on his sparkling, translucent, and perfectly intact skin. Nangong Liyun, fuming with rage between gritted teeth, strongly and hatefully glared at her. You want to murder your husband? That's not it. You left her in the joyous conjugal room, abandoning her? Su Luo really had a hard time imagining it. Then, otherwise, still need to bring her to run away on the escape route? You alone as a burden on this king is enough, anymore, and I am unable to take care of them. Nangong Liyun said quite bluntly. Even though Nangong Liyun used a disdainful tone, however, Su Luo couldn't help but say that when she heard these words, in her heart, she was so pleased that it simply made a person burst with joy. Still remembered back then in the Sunset Mountain Range, the Jade Lakes Ferry and Nangong Liyun's figures were like a pair of immortals inseparable in love. When the Jade Lakes Ferry left, she was disdainful of her. Su Luo's heart was very pleased and happy. She was unable to suppress the corner of her mouth from tilting up. When Nangong Liyun saw it, the corner of his mouth perked up into a simple smile, and he gave voice to a soft laugh. That made you this happy? Who's happy? Su Luo fiercely glared at him. Even she herself didn't know. Her smile carried a trace of sweet meaning. Exactly. Wasn't she just a foolish young woman across from me? Nangong Luyun lightly laughed as he looked at her. Su Luo peevishly rolled her eyes at him. Oh, that's right. You still haven't answered. Last night, the wind was high with rapid waves in the end. How did you find me? After mentioning this, Nangong Luyun once again glared at Su Luo very fiercely, itching to pounce up and eat her. Su Luo's heart became scared after being glared by him. In a daze, she asked, "Did I ask something wrong?" Seeing Nangong Luyun grinding his teeth, didn't know why, Su Luo's conscience felt extremely guilty. Obviously, she hadn't done anything wrong. Don't feel like saying. Nangong Luyun sent a ruthless glare at her, closed his eyes and nodded off to sleep. Fine, since you don't feel like saying it, then don't say it. Su Luo concentrated on the final process of treating him. The last blood clotting pill was sprinkled on his wound. The blood clotting pill could be taken orally and applied externally to do its job. This was the most intense medicinal pill. It was more than 10 times as painful as before. Nangong Luyun took deep breaths continuously. His lanky body was motionless. If you didn't look carefully, you wouldn't find any indication of the pain he was in. Does it hurt? Su Luo asked, her heart aching. No. Nangong Luyun slowly sucked in a breath, faintly sighed and released a breath of air. Used to it, suddenly, Su Luo felt her nose souring, the rim of her eyes turning slightly red. She turned her face away. One phrase of used to it. How many years of painful suffering had he gone through? She knew he was talking about the pain in his body that would act up once every month. Suddenly, a trace of shock flashed through Su Luo's mind. Every month, Nangong Luyun's illness would flare up and ache for one night. Calculating the time, Su Luo glanced back, looking at Nangong Luyun with a startled expression. The tears in her eyes almost tumbled out, her voice carrying a trace of being choked with emotions. Last night? Your illness flared up? Yes, that's right. She didn't remember it wrongly. It was precisely the 15th of every month that his illness would flare up. When he heard this being said, Nangong Luyun was almost gnashing his teeth in fury. He glared very fiercely towards Su Luo. You are still aware of it. Su Luo's heart became even weaker. Nangong Luyun took a few deep breaths, finally glaring at Su Luo severely. Slowly stressing each word, he grinded his teeth before finally biting out. Last night, this king, in order to chase after you, simply called you and still received no answer. Chapter 444, Softly Fragrant and Romantic 1. She could imagine that last night, he had already received such heavy internal injuries and external trauma, in addition to his illness flaring up, on top of that. Also, running into a storm surge on the ocean. So out of luck, how did he run into all these misfortunes? As for her, what was she doing at that time? Once Su Luo thought about this, she simply wanted to cover her face. Last night, under such conditions of high wind and rapid waves, she actually fell asleep. She could imagine him with great difficulty dragging his ill body that was seriously injured to chase after her. He was risking his life, sliding through the ocean, following after the direction she went spinning towards nonstop. While she was contentedly sound asleep, having a good dream. Thinking of this, Su Luo was feeling so guilty that she nearly kneeled down in front of him. Nangong Luyun raised an eyebrow, cast a quick sidelong glance at Su Luo, and the corner of his lips rose slightly. Now you are aware of your mistake? Su Luo kept silent, but nodded her head with all her might. Nangong Luyun beckoned her with his hand. Come here. Su Luo eagerly, with jolting buttocks, ran over. She cleverly sat in front of him, silently watching him. That was a cleverly cute, meek appearance that Nangong Luyun had never seen on her body. Nangong Luyun reached out his hand to rub her head. Do you know what to do now? Su Luo expressed that she didn't understand. Nangong Luyun slanted her a glance. He sought a comfortable position to lean against on the bed and looked at Su Luo nonchalantly. Now, this king is hungry. Su Luo's gaze landed on his chest wound. After sprinkling blood-clotting pill on top, the blood flow on the wound had already stopped. Moreover, it had the faint signs of healing. Su Luo washed a fruit and handed it over to Nangong Luyun. Unexpectedly, he was still very picky and shook his head. This king doesn't eat such random stuff. They were stranded on this uninhabited island, and he was still this picky. Su Luo speechlessly cast him a glance. Besides these fruits, there are only oysters and amethyst-thorned fishes. Nangong Luyun very extravagantly spoke a sentence. Just the amethyst-thorned fish then? One amethyst-thorned fish was equivalent to one green-colored crystal stone. Fetching the fish to roast, then, you basically couldn't absorb its spirit essence. But Su Luo now lacked other stuff. An amethyst-thorned fish was something she had plenty of. Once she heard Nangong Luyun say this, she promised without raising any objections. As far as barbecuing was concerned, Su Luo was so familiar with it that she could do it with one hand tied behind her back. In a short while, she had roasted 2 golden-colored amethyst-thorned fishes, so fragrant that it assailed the nostrils. Su Luo's barbecuing skills was extremely good. Both sides of the fish were golden and not burned. It was flaky and crispy at the same time. Just smelling it would make the person eating emotionally moved. Su Luo handed the larger one to Nangong Luyun. Ready to eat? Take it? Nangong Luyun glanced once at her. With an aggrieved expression, he said, You aren't showing a bit of sincerity. In any case, shouldn't you be feeding it to this king? What? Su Luo was extremely hungry herself. She had snatched up the roasted fish and was stuffing it in her mouth, and with obstructed speech, she asked. Heavens knows it had already been 2 days since she had a grain of rice. She was so famished that her bones were sticking out. This king is a sick person. Nangong Luyun acted somewhat shamelessly. Su Luo exasperatedly rolled her eyes at him. Nothing wrong with your hands. However, this king is a sick person. So sick I'm about to die. Nangong Luyun angrily glared at her. An unreasonable male was simply incredibly childish. Afraid that him getting angry would affect the wound, Su Luo could only raise both hands and surrender. Okay. Feed you, then just feed you, like a disabled person. Nangong Luyun obviously was still somewhat displeased and turned his face away, not looking at Su Luo. Su Luo didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and said, Didn't I say I will feed you? Why are you still mad? No sincerity. Nangong Luyun mumbled a phrase in complaint. How could I not have sincerity? Su Luo sat properly at his side, with the other hand turning his face that was panting with rage back. Ah, open your mouth. Chapter 445. Softly fragrant and romantic, 2. Nangong Luyun glanced at her faintly, leisurely saying, Still saying you are sincere, before feeding me, you don't even know to test to see if the temperature is too high, whether it can burn this king or not. Su Luo was finally convincingly defeated by this picky male. They had been reduced to these kind of circumstances, and he still insisted on living like a lord of the manor. Seeing his pair of monochrome eyes innocently staring at her, Su Luo simply lacked the tears to cry. Just a moment ago, she had clearly already eaten a fish. Could she still not have known whether it burned her hand or not? He was simply nitpicking. In order to placate this difficult, big boy child, Su Luo could only hold the amethyst thorn fish and take a bite out of it. Afterwards, she said to Nangong Luyun, It's fine. The temperature is neither too hot nor too cold. It's perfect. Quickly eat it. Nangong Luyun comfortably leaned against the soft cushions. His gaze was picky. His finger pointed at the place Su Luo took a bite, very seriously saying, This king wants to eat from that place. That straight-faced expression he gave made Su Luo stumped for words. Could it be that the meat on the back of the fish was especially tasty? She wasn't too picky and just randomly took a bite. She lifted her eyes and saw Nangong Liuyun's slightly narrowed phoenix eyes, with the corner of his lips tilted a touch, and Su Luo suddenly comprehended. You? This? She simply was speechless. As it turned out, the mystery actually lay in there. Nangong Liuyun calmly said a sentence. Didn't you say you feel guilty? Where is the guilt? Still haven't fed me any fish. Fine. Su Luo suffered a defeat. Last night, she really shouldn't have. Su Luo sucked in a deep breath. Smoothing out her breathing, she picked up the chopsticks, scraping the fish meat from the bones, and little by little, fed it to him. Nangong Liuyun now appeared to be an obedient child, clumsy, foolish. Where did he even have a little of that cruel, bloodthirsty manner? Cute and lovable, just like a little kid that was being fed food in kindergarten. With great difficulty, she finished feeding him the fish. Su Luo felt it was more challenging than running several hundred kilometers. Who would have imagined that Nangong Liuyun, this bastard, would actually still not stop? He bossily said to Su Luo, "This king wants to bathe." Su Luo suddenly had an urge to swat him to death. Now, what kind of situation are you in? Still want to take a bath? It was such a serious wound that she had just finished operating on, and it still hadn't formed a scab yet. In spite of everything, he still wanted to bathe. Really like a child, being deliberately provocative. Nangong Liuyun, however, was very obstinate. Shaking his head, he only blindly insisted. This king's body stinks to death. Wanna bathe? Can you wait until the wound gets a little better before bathing, okay? Right now, Su Luo seemed to be in the middle of coaxing a child throwing a tantrum. She was gentle and soft, but also seemed helpless. Not good, want it right now. This exceedingly obstinate, bratty kid who wouldn't do what he was told. Su Luo nearly clenched her teeth, with both hands placed at her hips. Nangong Liuyun, don't be so childish, okay? You are not a 3-year-old child. You should know what to do that's best for you. Nangong Liuyun, with an expression of having been wronged, turned his face away, refusing to acknowledge Su Luo. That fuming appearance, clearly, he was being petulant. Su Luo held her forehead. God who will come to tell her, the respected, powerful, insufferably arrogant His Highness Prince Jean. How could he have become so childish to this unreasonable extent? Nangong Liuyun's back was to her. His eyes looked at the vegetation at the corner, not saying a word. Su Luo stood unmoving at his back, as she somewhat helplessly watched him. The surroundings were very quiet, so still that you could hear the wind blowing through the leaves. All of a sudden, Nangong Liuyun tossed aside the embroidered quilt, his lanky body standing up. He got off the bed, turned his head around and just walked out. Su Luo was immediately anxious. Grabbing onto his hand that brushed by to stop him, she was flustered and exasperatedly said, "You still haven't recovered completely from your injuries. How could you get off the bed? Where do you want to go right now?" Nangong Liuyun glanced back to look at her, with half of his eyes hooded, unhurriedly said, "To bathe." Chapter 446, Softly Fragrant and Romantic, 3. Su Luo was immediately speechless. Already wounded to this degree, and still this in love with being clean? Seeing him determined to be this way, obstinate like a little old man in the end, Su Luo was unable to dissuade him, so she compromised. Okay, sit here, this young lady will wait upon you. At an angle, Su Luo couldn't see the corner of Nangong Liuyun's mouth, lifting slightly into a smiling expression of having gotten his way. Nangong Liuyun leisurely reclined on the mattress of the bed, watching Su Luo busily rushing about because of him. She was running back and forth. This gave rise to the full satisfaction and bliss in his eyes. Su Luo had an entirely different mood from his. This deserted mountain on an isolated island with nothing, and he, as a great young master of the house, still had so many demands. If it were not for considering that he had received a serious wound, she would not felt like dealing with him. Su Luo gave a heavy sigh, stooped down to fetch a bucket of fresh water to return, and also added a portion of celestial spirit water inside. If others were to know that Su Luo was this extravagant, very likely, they would have gone insane. Celestial spirit water, at that time, such a small bottle, and Su Manor had considered it to be an extremely precious treasure that was guarded seriously at the residence. But now, Su Luo had picked up half a bucket of celestial spirit water, poured it into a huge circular tub, and then stirred it carefully to get it evenly distributed. Subsequently, Su Luo again used her fire attribute's capability to directly heat up this tub of water to the appropriate temperature. She felt it was more or less ready. Then Su Luo recalled that she hadn't brought soap. She couldn't help but look to the sky and sigh. She vowed to wait until she returned to the Empire. There she would equip all the necessary goods for everyday living in order to prepare for use in times of need. Otherwise, an empty space was only suited as a decorative item, and not cleverly used as a great secret tool for leaving home to travel. Nangong Luyun noiselessly appeared, and passed to Su Luo a handful of grass. Take this. This is aromatic soap grass. Nangong Luyun gave a cough and said, it's much easier to use compared to regular soap. It also has a sweet scent. Su Luo received the grass in a daze. Suddenly, she returned to her senses. Ever since they entered the cave, she had helped him heal by cutting off the rotted flesh. When did he still have the time to leave the cave? Then in the end, from where did he bring out this handful of aromatic soap grass? Suddenly, Su Luo recollected that when she first entered the cave to find a path, she didn't see him. Could it be at that time? Su Luo's complexion darkened slightly and unenthusiastically cast him a glance. So it turns out you had already been prepared since earlier. Su Luo crossed both hands over her chest. Her gaze landing on his body was as light as a feather. Nangong Luyun gave a slight cough and turned his face away, but his tone was still tough. This king was soaked in seawater for an entire night. Unlike someone who had a layer of ice as protection, this bastard certainly said it on purpose, deliberately mentioning that matter to give birth to guilt in her heart. Su Luo admitted it. Every time she remembered this matter, she would be extremely remorseful about last night's event. Okay, wasn't blaming you. Su Luo snorted twice. Also not considering why this king's wound was so serious. Nangong Luyun grumbled some more. With a complaining tone, he said, at that time, if this king had complied, how could I end up like this right now? Immediately, Su Luo's entire face blackened. What was this bastard doing? Complaining that he didn't comply with the Jade Lakes fairy in the joyous conjugal room? Nangong Luyun cast a glance at Su Luo and again muttered with a faint blaming tone. Also not examining. If it was not because of chasing after someone, how could more injuries be added to this king's wounds? To the point that this king can't even bathe himself? This was taking all his injuries and completely unjustly placing them on top of her head? Su Luo choked on a breath of air, but couldn't send it out in anger after all. Fine, fine, fine. It was all my fault. I will take responsibility till the end. If he was to continue speaking, even living in this cave would also be her fault. Only now did Nangong Luyun arrogantly raise his chin, with both hands behind his back, and he leisurely said, of course it is. Su Luo did not feel like taking notice of this rogue, and pulled him to sit on the stool. Chapter 447. Softly fragrant and romantic. 4. Mainly because of the so-called unfamiliar at first, but well accustomed to it soon enough. Now, peeling off Nangong Luyun's clothing was simply so familiar to Su Luo that she could do it blindfolded. Wherefore did she still have the nervousness of the first time, when even her fingers trembled? So to say, how formidable a kind of thing was a habit. Nangong Luyun cleverly sat on the stool. allowing Su Luo's agile movements to peel him naked. Seeing Su Luo's such efficient movements, Nangong Luyuan actually smiled and cast a gaze that made fun of her. Oh, this time, what is going on? You are not blushing? Just one glance at that infuriating smile on his face, and Su Luo immediately recalled when she entered Prince Jin's royal manor. This bastard purposefully caught her and forced her to wait upon him as a servant boy. That time, he still calmly pretended he didn't recognize her, truly shameless. On that day, she was made to act like a servant boy. Now she was a maid. Why was it that her position in front of him didn't ever seem to go up? Who's blushing, you big-headed demon? What piece of flesh on your body have I not seen? Su Luo very proudly raised an eyebrow. Nangong Luyun swiftly continued, adding a sentence with the expression of proper righteousness. It is you yourself who admitted that this king's entire naked body has been seen by you. You must take responsibility. Su Luo's entire face was black as she stared coldly at him. It's you who insisted on taking a bath, but the clothing was all stripped off by you. You don't want to take responsibility? Nangong Luyun's expression was deadly serious. Every sentence pressed in on her. Su Luo held her forehead. At the same time, her heart couldn't help but think that this bastard simply making a big deal of wanting to bathe. It shouldn't be because he wanted her to see him naked, so that afterwards he could force her to take responsibility. If it was other people, Su Luo naturally would not believe it, but if it was Nangong Luyun, this bastard's brain lobe had different grooves from ordinary people. There were only things he couldn't think of, never things he wouldn't do. Nangong Luyun saw Su Luo not saying a word, and once again, he gave 2 snorts. This king remained chaste because of you, now having been seen completely naked by you. In any case in this lifetime, it must be you. You figure it out and do it accordingly. This rogue, really going so far as to place the blame on her. Su Luo slanted him a glance. The majestic, stately His Highness Prince Jin, a person high above with 10,000 people beneath him. Why on earth would he insist on her taking responsibility? It was not like there were no other women. I know, try to be together for 3 months. If it doesn't work, we break up and go our separate ways, Su Luo said in a smiling, sing-song tone. When Nangong Luyun heard the last half of the sentence, his expression blackened. However, very quickly, it returned to normal. He unhurriedly watched her with a serene expression, but his eyes held deep provocation. You dare? Su Luo didn't feel like continuing to bicker with him and immediately changed the subject. What's the matter with your martial arts? When will it be restored? You are actually concerned about this king. Nangong Luyun slanted her a faint glance. Naturally, that's because I am concerned about myself, Su Luo said disgruntledly. Now that we have landed on this uninhabited island, don't know when we can return. We can only wait until your wounds heals, then we can consider the matter of returning. Nangong Luyun's expression seemed to have a touch of displeasure. Just this unwilling to continue living on this uninhabited island with this king? Su Luo knew he had misunderstood, and she merely smiled as she explained it to him. Has anyone ever told you that you are narrow-minded? Who dares? Nangong Luyun said, full of a domineering attitude. He was simply a tyrant. Those who followed along with him lived. Those who opposed him perished. Su Luo helplessly shook her head and explained it to him. It's not that I don't want to live here. It's only because before, the life and death duel with Su Qing had already been agreed upon. This matter is less than 1 month away. You tell me, what's to be done? If they were stranded on this uninhabited island, when the time came, she wouldn't even have the chance to enter the stage. Wouldn't it then be a defeat without a fight? This was not the style Su Luo was accustomed to. Nangong Luyun's expression eased somewhat in a split second. Muttering to himself, he half promised and then gave Su Luo a more precise time. 7 days. Chapter 448, Softly Fragrant and Romantic, 5. The 7 days Nangong Luyun said. Starting from the first day, there was constant catastrophe. It was not the type of natural disaster like being blown by wind and rained upon. Rather, it was what would be considered a catastrophe. Just barely managed to make Nangong Luyun clean, Su Luo mopped up the wet patches on the ground. Su Luo got the person in the tub out and picked up the rest to toss it outside. Unexpectedly, pouring out the water from the tub actually attracted a person over. Seeing that malevolent and frightening face in front of her, Su Luo detected a sense of familiarity. This face was densely covered in scars, full of potholes, and one of the eyes had been blown away. He was horrible to look at. The other party's sole remaining eye seemed to be tempered with venom, as it unwaveringly stared at Su Luo and was unblinkingly fixed on her. Stunned, nicely surprised, hatred, bitter resentment. All these came together within that single eye suffused with dark green radiance. Liao Yin? It took Su Luo a long time to recognize him. This ugly person was actually Liao Yin? It was simply too unfathomable. She remembering the Liao Yin from a few days ago, who was covered from head to toe in a dark green embroidered robe. His appearance was clearly smart with handsome facial features. Although he fell just short of Nangong Liuyun's looks, his appearance was still extremely outstanding. But the him right now was so ugly as to frighten even the deity of ghosts to tears. If you glued him to the door, his looks could ward off evil spirits. If you hung him on the headboard of a bed, he could act as a type of contraception. Liao Yin stared fixedly at Su Luo, fuming with rage between gritted teeth. Loathsome girl. The heavens didn't want me to die. I finally found you. Liao Yin's hands were like the claws of an eagle. Fast as electricity, it reached for Su Luo's shoulder. From an extremely handsome appearance to an utterly, unbearably ugly one. All of his loss was conferred on him by the loathsome girl in front of him. The hatred of being disfigured was like the enmity of having one's father killed, absolutely irreconcilable. If he didn't kill this loathsome girl today, how could he, Liao Yin, still have the face to live on this earth? Liao Yin's style of action was like a storm, with speed fast as lightning. There wasn't enough time for Su Luo to dodge. She slipped on the spot, and was thus able to avoid this grab of his. At the same time, Su Luo's heart was very shocked. In the end, what was going on? Liao Yin wasn't blown dead by the spirit ball, then fine, but his martial arts cultivation had actually advanced. Moreover, it didn't just advance a little bit. Just when Liao Yin was about to attack Su Luo once more in rage, the light shadow of a person noiselessly appeared at the cave entrance. Stay your hand, Nangong Luyun? Liao Yin's hand immediately stopped in the blink of an eye, as he stared in astonishment at Nangong Luyun. His mind momentarily could not return to his senses. Wasn't he locked in the joyous conjugal room with Yao Yao? How could he have appeared here by himself? Could it be that Yao Yao was also here? Nangong Luyun placed his hands behind his back as he stood up. His body appeared straight and tall, as well as relaxed. His expression was unkindly cool and indifferent, with his icy eyes coldly sweeping a glance at Liao Yin. What are you doing? Having been swept by his meaningful gaze, Liao Yin instinctively cowered. Before, for many years, Liao Yin had always lived underneath Nangong Luyun's prestige, so he had an instinctive reverence and deferment towards Nangong Luyun. Therefore, Nangong Luyun didn't have to take action. Him merely standing there indifferently was able to make Liao Yin's heart grow cautious, afraid he would not be able to stop his killing move. How is it that you are here? What about Yao Yao? What did you do to her? Liao Yin's gaze was cold and strict, as he shouted with deep worry and hatred. What did this king do to her? Nangong Luyun calmly stood with his hands behind his back, smiling faintly with a raised eyebrow as he cast a sidelong glance at Liao Yin. Why don't you ask what she did to this king? Suddenly, Liao Yin's chest became obstructed, an unnatural expression flashing through his eyes. He had already known earlier about the matter of the joyous conjugal room and had also advised against it. A man was not like a woman. Even if a relationship had taken place, it would also be unable to tie him down. However, Yao Yao had insisted on using this method to force him to marry her. As her older brother, what could he have done? Chapter 449. Meeting One's Foe 1. In the end, where did you hide Yao Yao? Li Outyin, in a flustered manner and discomfitingly, yelled loudly towards Nangong Luyun. The latter merely arrogantly stood there with his hands behind his back, unhurriedly cast him a glance, and once again turned his face away. In the end, Li Outyin suddenly got angry. But Nangong Luyun had accumulated prestige for a long time. The many years of prestige wasn't something he wanted to ignore and could just ignore. Li Outyin glared at him furiously, lifted his foot, and immediately rushed inside. He searched everywhere once inside, but there wasn't a trace of Li Yao Yao. Nangong Luyun. Where's Yao Yao? That was the younger sister he doted on the most. He absolutely wouldn't allow her to meet with a mishap. Nangong Luyun cast him an indifferent glance. You ask this king. Who will this king ask? Wasn't Yao Yao locked in the joyous conjugal room together with you? How can you not know? Li Outyin shouted at Nangong Luyun in chagrin. Nangong Luyun, however, calmly said, this king indeed was locked in there. She may not necessarily be. Li Outyin's heart was startled. Worthy of being Nangong Luyun, to actually see what's wrong so quickly. No matter what, you must hand over Yao Yao. Li Outyin furiously said. Li Outyin, your courage got a lot fatter, Nangong Luyun calmly said, while standing with his hands behind his back. His phoenix eyes narrowed, as he gave a smile that was not quite one towards Li Outyin. His gaze was as light as a feather, with a tone that was soft as a dandelion dancing in the breeze. So soft and relaxed, but full of a murderous aura. Li Outyin immediately stared blankly as an alarmed color then appeared in his eyes. From very young, he had known Nangong Luyun. He had unsurpassed talent, then fine, but it so happened that his willpower was even more astonishing. Therefore, his strength had always far surpassed everyone else. Frankly, Li Outyin had really been beaten into fearing Nangong Luyun. Therefore, whenever he faced Nangong Luyun, Li Outyin would inevitably lack some confidence. Now, Su Luo stood by Nangong Luyun's side, silently cursing unceasingly in her heart. Nangong Luyun could really act. Obviously, at this time, he was so weak that he nearly lost consciousness, but only relying on a few sentences, he was able to deter Li Outyin. Nangong Luyun once again coldly smiled. If you insist on finding Li Yao Yao, then return to your Li manor. You won't find her here. Having heard what was said, Li Outyin immediately let go of his worry. Even though Nangong Luyun didn't explicitly say it, but his meaning was very obvious. Yao Yao was safe. Li Outyin released a breath in relief. Only now did he coldly look towards Su Luo. Loathsome girl, give me your life. Li Outyin gave a loud shout and was just about to rush towards Su Luo. But Nangong Luyun merely lifted his foot to stand in front of Su Luo. If it was an ordinary person, assuredly, he would cry to the sky, rush to the ground and beg for forgiveness. But our His Highness Prince Jean took the opposite path to walk on. One could only see him coldly stare fixedly at Li Outyin. You want to die? Then this king will help you accomplish this. But don't blame this king for not remembering the two families' friendship. Nangong Luyun, don't you interfere in these muddled waters. Li Outyin aggressively yelled towards him. Nangong Luyun shot him an indifferent glance and arrogantly raised an eyebrow. This king's princess, if this king doesn't protect her, then who am I to protect? Li Outyin was furious and anxious at the same time. He speechlessly glared at Nangong Luyun and then very fiercely said, Nangong Luyun, this time, are you determined to interfere? Even though Nangong Luyun and Yao Yao's matter was empty with no fixed time set in the future, but as Li Yao Yao's older brother, he didn't want to be in a deadlock with Nangong Luyun. He didn't want to make an enemy of such an expert. If he was to act, then Li Outyin would only lose. Li Outyin very fiercely glared once at Su Luo. Fine. This time, taking Nangong Luyun into consideration, then I'll let you live an extra day. Leaving this sentence behind, Li Outyin, in a flash, became a white line and then a black dot, immediately fading away in the air. Chapter 450. Meeting One's Foe 2. Nangong Liuyun's pair of burning eyes stared fixedly at Li Aoyin's body, before his body weakly swayed a little. Su Luo immediately went up to support him and impatiently asked, "How are you? Still okay?" Just now, in order to scare Li Aoyin away, Nangong Luyun had continuously hardened his body to appear as if he was never injured. But Su Luo, who stood by his side, could clearly see that under that cold and solemn expression, what kind of pain there was. Nangong Luyun faintly said a sentence. "Still able to hold up, let's go in and talk." Su Luo nodded her head. It couldn't be said for sure if Li Aoyin was hidden in the surroundings. She supported Nangong Luyun to slowly enter the cave. For a moment, neither spoke. The atmosphere around them was somewhat heavy. Only after a long time did Su Luo force a smile to say, "How is it that Li Aoyin was not blown dead by the spirit pinball?" Nangong Luyun had a forced smile as he looked at her, reaching out to rub her head. "Forgot to tell you, when using the spirit pinball, actually, there is a little problem with the aftermath. For instance, there is a 1 in 10,000 possibility that it will allow the opponent to absorb the spirit force in the spirit pinball." Nangong Luyun spread out his hands and helplessly said, "That 1 in 10,000 chance was actually encountered by him. Then, it can be said that Li Aoyin had absorbed the spirit power in the spirit pinball? It should be so. His strength is a little better than before. Now, he should be 7th rank." Nangong Luyun said with a bitter smile. 7th rank? Su Luo could only feel the space between her eyebrows twitch. What kind of evil had she attracted? Before, she had wanted to take advantage of the situation to kill Li Aoyin, but who would have thought that she would actually send him off into the clear sky, allowing him to break straight through the 6th rank barrier to reach the 7th rank in a whirlwind. Now, on this uninhabited island, her own strength was lacking, and Nangong Luyun was seriously wounded. At this point of time, it was quite obvious that Li Aoyin's martial arts was currently the most formidable. He was not a fool. Before, Nangong Luyun was able to scare him away, but it was hard to say whether he wouldn't think about it and realize the truth before coming again. Su Luo, somewhat depressed, patted her head. The first time she used a spirit pinball, and she smashed it at a person who then absorbed the spirit power. Should it be said that her luck was extremely good or her luck was super, unequivocally bad? Should we still live here? If they were to still live here as before, then it was tantamount to waiting for Li Aoyin to think it through and to afterwards bring the fight to their doorway. If we leave here immediately, even if his head was stupid, then he would understand.